We're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to the FCC's Office Communications Business Opportunities third annual Capital Strategies workshop. We've got two great panels today. We've got our public sector panel, as you're seating before you, Janelle Trigg, Pat Kelly, David Gillers, and Gary Boges. Welcome to them. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We're going to talk about, at least in this first panel, current initiatives that are governmental initiatives on funding for small businesses, as well as I think we're going to get into a little bit of a policy discussion about the government's role in incentivizing and providing catalysts for new business entry in communications and related fields. So looking forward to that discussion. Later on in the morning, we're going to have a group of private equity representatives talk to us about their investment strategies and their view of the current economy and new business creation and what small businesses ought to be doing to attract investment attention from their groups. But first, OCBO would like to congratulate departing Commissioner Michael Copps, who has had an extremely illustrious career here. We're going to miss him. He has been a firebrand on issues of inclusion with respect to small and diverse businesses, also with respect to communities that have been traditionally ignored when it comes to communications infrastructure and the like. Commissioner Copps has been a big supporter of our office throughout his tenure. We are going to miss him. Of course, there are plots and schemes that are abounding that are attempting to keep him here. So, but we'd like to take this moment to extend our congratulations to him and give him a token of our appreciation and give him an opportunity. Commissioner Copps has an appointment on the Hill, I believe, so he's got a short schedule, so we appreciate him being here, and I'd like everybody just to give a round of applause to Commissioner Copps and his career.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Over there, can I take a look at that?
Yeah.
Right. Wonderful. Oh, get a picture. One more. Thank you, and good morning, all. Welcome. This is it's a very meaningful and heartwarming recognition, Tom, and I appreciate it. I appreciate it because you're doing so many good things related to advancing small and medium-sized enterprises and minority and women ventures, and we've got a long way to go in both of those. And these are things that I've tried to work on through most of my career, particularly my last two stops, which was Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Trade Development, and now here for over 10 years as a member of the Federal Communications Commission. But there has always been, I think, in those posts, a heavy emphasis, and working with my friend Jim Meenan, who headed up a lot of the advisory committees and initiatives at the Department of Commerce, and a lot of you folks here in communications. We all know the statistics, and everybody can rattle them off about the importance of a small business, and it creates the overwhelming number of new jobs in the country and all that. Sometimes our rhetoric kind of outruns our performance, and it's easy to say these things, but to develop and implement strategies to really make a difference on the bottom line is often quite a different challenge. But I'm generally pleased with what I have seen here under the current chairman, bringing folks like Tom Ann and working with Carolyn and the others with just the commitment and the national broadband strategy, the recognition that ubiquitous broadband deployment and broadband adoption, which is equally as great a challenge, are so integral to the future of the country. And if we don't get it right, the gaps between rural and urban, rich and poor, large and small, are just going to get worse. And it would be the ultimate tragedy to imagine that here we have all of this opportunity creating technology of the 21st century, broadband and the internet, and to imagine that that could somehow end up making things worse rather than better is really a sobering thought, and it doesn't have to be that way, but neither is it on autopilot to turn out just great. I spend a lot of time, as many of you know, on media, fearing as I do that we've lost so much in the way of journalism and investigative reporting and news on the internet, as we've had all of this consolidation and big mega media companies buying up smaller and smaller independent local stations. A lot of small businesses have bitten the dust over the last 30 or 40 years. And that's been bad not only for the business environment, but it's been bad for the civic environment of the country too, because when you have fewer businesses, you have fewer voices. You have a less vibrant civic dialogue, and with all of the problems that this country faces right now, if we don't really have a robust civic dialogue, if we don't have news and information coming from different localities, coming from a diversity of sources, reflecting a diversity of viewpoints, then we're just kind of shooting ourselves in the face for the future. The competitive environment that we have in this country right now, excuse me, in telecommunications and media is not one that I am thrilled with by any stretch of the imagination. I think the Commission many years ago got off in the wrong course on lack of competition policies. I think that's been reflected. It was reflected in our sector before it hit a lot of other sectors in the economy, all of which helped drag down our economy and cause a lot of the problems that we're in right now. So it's really time to pause and have a national strategy and put some emphasis on small business, on minority-owned businesses, on women-owned businesses. These are going to be the majority, some already are, of our population right now, and that's got to be reflected in the economic and commercial activity of the country. I think the National Broadband Strategy that Chairman Janikowski and his team put together put a good spotlight on the needs of small business, on the needs of minority and women-owned enterprises too. But it's just something you got to keep plugging away at and working, and it's obviously particularly hard in this environment right now with the capital challenges that small businesses face. How do you raise money? How do you get started? How do you keep going? But we just got to realize that it is such an important priority that if we can't get small business going, we're not going to get the country going, and if we're not going to get the country going, we're not going to regain our international competitiveness. And I think some of the challenges that we face right now, in the breadth and depth of their severity, go back to some of the challenges we had in the 1930s. They really are serious problems. How are we going to get that unemployment rate below ever 8% or 7.5% or 7%? How are we going to be competitive in world markets again after we've outsourced so many jobs? How are we going to reconfigure our education system to do better justice by our kids and to teach them how to use the tools of the digital age and how to manage them and how not to be misused by those tools? How do we ensure 50 million people who don't have health insurance? How do we do something about our energy dependence, the degradation of our climate? The list just goes on and on. And that's why I say the challenges are so severe. That's why we need a national strategy with everybody participating, and that's why we really need to wake up to the role that small businesses can play, and the minority-owned and women-owned businesses can play in reversing the course of our decline and trying to build a better future for us. We have the opportunity to do it. We have wonderful new tools to do it. I think we have a commitment in this government, and I'm glad we have the Rural Utilities Service here and the Small Business Administration and others. I think some folks from Congress coming down here today. This is really good. It's a partnership. And that's the only way you get us out of the hole that we're in. I used to work for Senator Fritz Hollings from South Carolina. Some of you know, whenever he was describing a big problem, he'd say the ox is in the ditch this time. Well, we've got the ox in the ditch, and we really got to figure out how to pull that ox out of the ditch. And the only way I know how to do that is by working together and pulling together the private sector working with the public sector to build infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, opportunity infrastructure. That's how we built the United States of America. Nobody's advocating something brand new here. That's how we built roads and turnpikes and canals and bridges back in the 1800s, regional railroads, transcontinental railroads, how we built the interstate highway system, how we got rural electrification out to everybody, how we did plain old telephone service. The aberration was those 8 years or so before the current commission when we just thought, don't worry about any of this, the market will take care of it, and build broadband out everywhere in the United States of America. We never should have expected business to do that because there are places where there's no incentive for business to go. So I think if we start off realizing that the private sector is always the locomotive that pulls the train, but you got to have a destination, you got to have a place for it to go, you have to have some vision and a national goal. And that's what we've had in the past when we built national infrastructure. And I think the deviation from that was those 8 years when we ignored all of this, and I think now we're starting to focus again. It's a difficult time to focus. It's a difficult time to bring resources to bear, but we've got to find ways to do that. So you folks being here today are part of the solution, tackling the hard problems. Excuse me, I hope that out of this exercise we'll get some good information for the commission, the future commissioners coming in. You got two great nominees who hopefully will be confirmed ere long to come down here, and I hope you will get with them, and I think they already understand the importance of these issues, but again, it's just kind of keep hitting, keep pushing. That's the only way anything gets done. So the sacrifice of your time and your attendance here means a lot. I really have enjoyed working with Tom and Carolyn and the group. They bring an incredible wealth of not just experience, but innovation and new approaches. And I wish we could get more money into that particular part of the FCC's operation, and I'll keep pushing for that, although I only got a couple weeks left, so I can't guarantee success, but hopefully the successors will too. But it's an important priority. I really do appreciate this, and it will have an honored place in my little shelves in my house when I clear out of the FCC. I look forward to seeing lots of you in the future. I may be retiring, but I'm going to keep speaking out about the issues that I have pursued here, and the stuff you're talking about today is one of those. So I wish you good luck, good discussion, and I thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Copps. And just with that in mind, I think one of the issues that Commissioner Copps has raised is one I think we'll spend some time discussing. That is collaboration between private and public sectors, understanding the intersection of infrastructure development and how the private sector can provide resources for that, but understanding what the role of government is and helping with that very, very major initiative. Before we proceed, though, I'd like to introduce the Deputy Administrator of the Rural Utility Service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who is, it is my real pleasure to introduce Jessica Zafolo, who will speak to us a little bit about what RUS is up to. We also have Gary Bogus here, obviously, from RUS, who'll talk more on our panel about that. But first, I'd like to have Jessica say a few words.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And I just want to reiterate what the Commissioner said and just applaud him for his legacy here in this country and internationally. We all owe such a debt of gratitude to Commissioner Copps for being a voice for consumers, for women and minority-based businesses, and for customers in the telecommunications and media markets. It is so important what he has done for this nation. So again, I want to just applaud him one more time, because he has done so much, really also to guide this administration and really helping us understand what's truly needed out there in so many communities. So at RUS, we turn to Commissioner Copps and really a lot of the commissioners here, Commissioner Clyburn and others, for how we can really deliver our programs smarter and more efficiently in so many communities and really diversify those who come to the RUS for loan and grant financing. So for RUS and for all of us in the administration, I just want to thank you again, because without you, Commissioner Copps, this country would really not be what it is in terms of the level of diversity and consciousness that we have placed in our communications policy landscape, I think, throughout your tenure. So thank you very much. I want to just talk a little bit about what we are doing at RUS and give you some perspective on what the focus is under this administration in terms of rural and underserved communities. As we all know, the availability of fixed and mobile broadband is one of the most central pillars of economic growth in any community. We take that very seriously. It's also one of the most important economic development tools needed to attract businesses and increase the quality of life for millions of Americans who live in rural areas, and particularly those who are minority-based farmers and ranchers. We have a very strong focus at USDA under the leadership of Secretary Vilsack to really expand the aperture of opportunities among farmers and ranchers that are women and minority-owned. Really important. We want to do this right, and it's a huge commitment across the civil rights landscape and across what we do at RUS in terms of the loan and grant programs that we offer. From precision agriculture to selling commodities into the global market and securing goods and services at affordable prices, information transmitted digitally is truly important and quite essential. Minority and women-owned farming and ranching businesses are deeply dependent on internet access to sustain production needed to feed American families, generate and distribute renewable energy, that harness the natural resources and the natural resource supply in rural areas, and produce alternative fuel sources that will help reduce our dependence on foreign oil and contribute to the overall economy. This is what we're focused on at USDA. The chances for both farm and non-farm businesses, technical schools, community colleges, and other anchor institutions to stay put and keep their doors open across rural America is quite slim if they do not have access to affordable, high-quality broadband service. The Obama administration is focused on the important link between broadband and job growth in rural America. You saw the President's interest in this topic as he visited rural communities in Iowa and Minnesota and other rural communities throughout the summer. We're unified across the administration in our vision that rural America plays a vital part in this administration's effort to transform the economy, to create jobs and encourage investment. And that's why this gathering is so critical, because we need to really bridge the discussion over access to capital and the ability to do it effectively, creatively, and smartly with a dwindling pot of resources that we have at the federal level. And at USDA Rural Development, you'll hear from my colleague Gary Bogus a little bit about this, but there's a very strong focus within rural development, which is the mission area that the RUS is housed within. And we have a very, very deep level focus on access to capital and creating capital financing opportunities to establish and grow small to medium-sized businesses in rural communities. And that's where this conversation can really guide us, not just at RUS, but across the administration. This Secretary, our Secretary Tom Vilsack, joined the President in an unprecedented demonstration of support and commitment for expanding our efforts to invest in technology and infrastructure in rural areas. The entire Cabinet came together in unity to support rural economic development, starting with the President's bus trip throughout the Midwest over the summer. Many of us fondly refer to it as the Summer of Rural. In the beginning of our telecommunications program at RUS, which started over 61 years ago, we have invested close to $22 billion in advanced telecommunications infrastructure to high-cost rural areas. Through our low-interest loans and grants, the RUS has made expansion of high-speed networks economically feasible in areas where cost, demographics, and topography make it very difficult to attract any provider. We understand the difficulty in bringing investment to these areas, and that's where a lot of this discussion today, I hope, can go. Despite our success in narrowing the broadband gap between rural and urban areas, many rural areas remain highly unserved today. Throughout the Delta region, throughout the Plain States, throughout the Northeast, in Alaska, Hawaii, and in the insular areas of Puerto Rico. And the islands. This is very, very important, and this is something we think about every day at RUS. We need input from all of you to do this better. So to underscore the need for broadband access in rural communities, the National Agricultural Statistics Service, otherwise known as NASS, N-A-S-S, conducted a study on the percentage of American farms that are dependent on some form of internet access to conduct business. Over 38% of all farms use DSL service, up from 23%. And overall, a total of 62% of all U.S. farms have some form of internet access, up from 59%. These statistics illustrate the growing need among farm-based businesses, and particularly those that are owned by minority-based communities, for internet access is surprisingly low, and we need to do better. Want to talk very briefly about a couple of tools we have at RUS that we are very proud to deploy and very, very excited to talk about here. One is that today the Secretary and our Administrator is proud to announce the 2011 list of awardees under the Distance Learning Telemedicine Grant Program. We'll be announcing close to 100 awardees today, and we're really proud of the work that is taking place in these communities to provide advanced medical services and advanced educational services, as well as telepsychiatry, telepharmacy, teleradiology to rural areas that otherwise are extremely limited in their capacity to access these types of services due to extraordinary distances. We just don't want consumers out there driving 100 miles to go to a hospital or go to school to be able to be part of our economy. It's just not acceptable. So at RUS, we are very excited to be announcing our awards today, and I will be happy to provide the list of awardees to Thomas when the Secretary announces them a little bit later today. But what I'd like everybody here to do is take a look at the awardees and take a look at the creative businesses that we have financed this year, and the kinds of opportunities that exist to support the deployment of advanced technology in communities that otherwise have no opportunities to tap these opportunities and be part of the digital economy. Switching a little bit to tribal outreach and what we're trying to do to expand the aperture of opportunities among Native communities. The RUS has conducted close to 33 government-to-government consultations with tribal nations to enhance our delivery of our programs across tribal communities and Native nations. And we have succeeded in publishing a rulemaking pursuant to the 2008 Farm Bill last month that expands the RUS opportunities to make it easier for tribal nations to apply for a loan or grant. We want to make it easier for folks to be able to come to our agency and get access to capital. So this is, and Gary, I'm sure will be happy to talk about this in more detail. It is known as the Substantially Underserved Trust Area Provisions in the 2008 Farm Bill, otherwise known as SUTA. And the comment period has been extended so that we can get more comment from the public. We've extended it until January. So we'll be doing a series of webinars starting in 2 weeks, and we hope we get as much participation as possible. Want to just talk very briefly and then turn it over to Tom about other opportunities that we have through the Recovery Act. To date, the RUS invested close to $3 billion in Recovery Act funding under the Broadband Initiatives Program. The projects that we have financed will bring high-speed broadband to nearly 7 million rural residents in 360,000 businesses and 30,000 community anchor institutions and Native American lands in 45 states and 1 U.S. territory. In total, these projects are expected to create roughly 30,000 jobs and hopefully more. And the goal with our Recovery Act work across the administration is to create and attract high-wage, high-skilled, high-tech jobs in these areas that require a skill set to help with the construction of networks. So high-skilled construction, high-skilled engineering, accounting. These are the types of jobs that are required to build an advanced network in rural areas, and that's what these projects will generate. And we've already been seeing it by a number of the projects that have begun to break ground. We're entering the winter months, so clearly it's a little bit more challenging to start trenching. As you can see, it's pretty cold out there, and we live in the South, known as Washington, D.C., so you can imagine what our colleagues are dealing with and the awardees in other regions of the country that are trying very hard to move their projects forward. But we're moving very swiftly through the implementation phase, and we're really excited about what's going to come forth across America through the Recovery Act projects. I want to talk very briefly on the Rural Council. Policymakers forget that over 16% of Americans live in rural communities. And what the Secretary likes to remind folks is that 40% of rural America is serving our country through the military. So we have a really strong nexus in rural communities towards the national security of our nation and the productivity of our nation. To enhance the government's efforts to address unemployment needs of rural America, this summer we were proud to have the President sign an executive order which is the first to establish the first White House Rural Council. This is really an unprecedented effort, and we're really pleased that this is the first of its kind to really convene a conversation on what is happening in rural America. And that's where I think a lot of input from all of you comes in. Investment in rural infrastructure is not just for the benefit of rural residents and rural businesses. It benefits our entire economy and creates demand for high-wage jobs. So we need to think about the interplay between rural and urban, between what's happening in rural America and the businesses that are being created and how that benefits the entire economy. So with that, I want to thank everybody for including RUS in today's discussion, and we're really proud of all the work that's happening across the nation among our rural partners that are minority and women-based small businesses. We want to help you grow, and our doors are open to help you do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. Truly informative, just to find out what a tremendous role that RUS has in infrastructure development. I think certainly a lot of our constituents aren't as aware of how how tremendous the effort is that's going on at USDA and RUS with respect to small business. So with that, I'd like to get started with this panel. A couple of housekeeping details. Obviously, there are going to be a number of questions coming from me as the moderator, but Calvin Osborne from my office will be walking back and forth. So if you have questions for this panel, he's going to be handing out index cards. By all means, please jot your thoughts down. Let me know who you are in your organization, so I can say that on the record as well when I pass those questions through. This session is also being streamed live, so there are going to be questions coming from our online audience as well. And I think right now it's about 9:35. We're going to go for a little over an hour, take a break at 11:15, and then we'll start the second panel. So I hope everybody stays for that. I think we have, and Calvin, tell me if do we have the survey the survey forms? Okay. They'll be coming out in a few minutes. I asked sort of at the end of the conferences, and for those of you that are going to be participating in the breakout sessions, to take a couple minutes to fill out our survey form. It's helpful for us to understand sort of where you found out about our conference and what you think about the information that we're putting forward. So hopefully you'll take a minute to fill those out. Now I'd like to jump to our panel. Again, I'd like to say thank you to all of our experts that have taken the time out to come and talk to you today. I think we'll start ladies first. Janelle Trigg, who is a great friend of the agency. She's from Lerman Center, and I'm going to have Janelle start and tell us a little bit about herself and why she's here. And I think she's going to be talking to us a little bit about the Telecommunications Development Fund. Janelle?
Thank you, Thomas. It's my pleasure to join you today. I also commend OCBO on its continued support of this important issue in terms of capitalization for small businesses. I am a former member of OCBO. I'm an alumnus, and I spend a lot of time here at the Federal Communications Commission. I've also had the pleasure of working with the Small Business Administration as its Assistant Chief Counsel for Telecommunications in the Office of Advocacy. The Office of Advocacy is an independent office of the SBA, and its job is to advocate on behalf of small businesses. That includes minorities and women and other ethnic groups. So indeed, I'm in private practice with Lerman Center, but I'm also a former broadcaster. Spending 16 years on the sales and marketing side. I've invested in telecommunications and broadcast companies, so I have a unique perspective having worked with the private sector, public sector, and spend a lot of money in this area of the need for financing, and I'm welcome to be here. I also like to give my appreciation to Commissioner Copps for his service. I've worked with him for many years in my days at the SBA as well, and he is an extraordinary public service servant, and I hope to work with him and continue to work with him in his efforts to improve these areas. So thank you for being here.
We also have Pat Kelly. Thank you, Janelle. We also have Pat Kelly here from the U.S. Small Business Administration, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about his background, and I'm going to ask him to give just a little bit of an intro as to what programs are available through SBA. Pat.
Sure. This is on. Yeah, thanks, Thomas, and thank you for inviting us, the SBA, to participate today. I joined the agency about 14 months ago. I've been in the Obama administration for about 28 months. I was previously at the Department of Commerce, where I was a senior advisor at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I was there for about 12 months. So I'm excited to be at the Small Business Administration. Obviously, it's an exciting time to be associated with small business. We just had a terrific event, Small Business Saturday, which had a great response nationwide, and obviously President Obama went to a bookstore, and his daughters were the better for it. So we're excited to be here. I think the programs that I'm happy to talk to about today that I help work on are the 7A lending program, which is a loan guarantee program, the 504 commercial mortgage program, where a small business, owner-occupied business, can get long-term fixed-rate financing. And then we have a microloan program, which provides grants to nonprofit microloan intermediaries to make microloans up to $50,000 to businesses across the country. And so happy to talk about that. Also happy to talk about we have made some changes to our working capital programs. These are lines of credit programs which help finance short-term operating needs for businesses, which is critical now in the recovery. We also have made substantial changes to our contract line of credit, which will allow small business contractors to obtain financing when operating as a prime or a sub in a municipal, state, or federal contract, or a private sector contract. Substitute purchase orders for a formal contract to get financing on that. And then also financing with surety bonds as well. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. Also happy to talk about our Community Advantage program, where for the first time we are onboarding nonprofit mission-based lenders, CDFIs, CDCs, and microlenders to make use of the 7A loan program. and I'm happy to talk about that. And then also, most recently, Administrator Mills on September 20th, I believe, and Vice President Biden were in Solon, Ohio, where 13 of our largest lending partners announced a commitment for $20 billion in incremental loan increases for conventional small business lending, increased participation in the SBA 7A and 504 programs, and then finally support for the nonprofit mission-based lenders who will be making loans through our Community Advantage program. So happy to talk about that as well.
Thank you, Pat. Our third panelist is David Gillers. It's Gillers, right? Not Gillers. Okay. David is from the Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. David.
Thank you, Director Reed, and thank you again for having us here this year. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of the committee and on behalf of Senator Mary Landrieu. I can talk about the committee's oversight of the SBA and of the loan programs. There has been a record year. Fiscal year 2011 was a record year for lending at the SBA, in part due to my colleague Patrick Kelly's efforts, and some tweaks and some revisions that were made in the Small Business Jobs Act last year, which we had discussed last year. We had just passed the Small Business Jobs Act, and I had told you about things that we were looking forward to, and so I can report now on what actually has transpired in the past year. That includes SBA loan programs, 2 new innovative small business lending programs through the Department of the Treasury, which we're very excited about, and we are seeing some very real effects on the small business lending economy, which I'm happy to discuss. And finally, we can chat about what the committee and what Congress is doing now for small businesses. As you know, it is a very intensely political environment on the Hill, but even in this environment, there's a glimmer of hope. So my boss is Senator Mary Landrieu, who's a Democrat from Louisiana, a moderate Democrat, and our ranking member is Senator Olympia Snowe from Maine, who is a fairly progressive Republican. So on many issues, Senator Landrieu and Senator Snowe really see eye to eye. And it's our good fortune and our good luck that small business access to capital falls into that area where there is great synergy and kind of a great parallel approach between the two senators. So we have been able to make progress in that area, and I can chat about what the Congress, what has come over from the House, what the Senate is now looking at for capital formation for small businesses, specifically for high growth companies, which I know a lot of the folks here would fall into, and plans even for the next month. You know, we've only got a few weeks left in the session of Congress, and so there could be some exciting things happening, which I can chat about as well. And finally, today is going to be a significant vote in the Senate on the director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. As some folks may know, there are provisions in the CFPB or certain offices focused on small businesses and small business lending, and some data collection that has never really happened before in the small business lending industry. So we can chat about that as well. Most importantly, though, I'm inspired by Commissioner Kopps's words and all the other panelists, and by everyone's presence here. I think that there's a lot of good that we can do together, and I look forward to chatting.
Thank you, David. Our next panelist is Gary Bogus from the Rural Utility Service. Gary, thank you for coming.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, thank you. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on what USDA's role is in building small businesses. And one of the concerns that you're going to have is we are limited to the size and the population area. So every one of our programs has a different size or population requirement and it's basically focused at the rural community. So I want you to keep that in mind, and I can get into specifics and questions in that. But what we tried to do is create wealth, and I don't think there's a small business, minority-owned business, or woman-owned business that isn't interested in creating wealth. So Jessica mentioned we put out $22 billion in just telecommunications loans. Now that's since 1949, and many of those businesses were small businesses. They were local communities trying to get a telephone service in their town for the first time. Now, my interest is I'm one of the senior risk managements for the agency, and I want to tell you that we only have a $4 billion outstanding loan portfolio. So with simple rounding math, that's $22 billion minus $4 billion. We've created $18 billion worth of wealth in rural America just in one of our telecommunications programs. And so we have a whole host of programs, and I want to expand it from just RUS, because under rural development, we have rural utility service, we have rural business and community facility services, and we have rural business, and we have our RUS. So we have these 3 program areas, all of which have the same track record of building large amounts of wealth in rural communities. And we're still there. We want to bring that together for you, because what we do is we try to make it so our urban cousins have the same, and our rural cousins, I mean, can get the same services that their urban cousins can get. And we're trying to bridge that equality program. So just quickly, we do a telecommunications infrastructure program. We do a broadband program that's to try to get to communities that have less than 2 competitors in communities that have less than 20,000 members, so smaller communities. We have a Community Connect grant. That's a grant program that will bring broadband to an area that doesn't have it at all. So this is the first pipe that gets laid, and it's really designed around the community, which requires the community to make a commitment in that area, including setting up workstations that would have access for everybody to come and try out broadband and build on it. And that's the other key factor that Jessica mentioned, that we worked in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to bring rural American broadband out there. But our key initiative now is to build on that. And that's why I'm here. I'm here and you're here, as we hope you can build businesses that will help and provide and add on to that rural business network, or that rural broadband network that we have built. So let me just go into some of the other programs that are outside of, or that are quite one-off of telecommunications strictly. We got our distance learning and telemedicine program that Jessica mentioned, and that's really to get that community connected then to the world and connected through education and through medicine. We also have a community facilities program that's run by our rural housing area, and that's to sponsor any community idea, business creation function that is community-based and community-owned. So in that particular area, we'll try to put out over $1 billion this year to just get community services up to speed. That could be anything from an ambulance to maybe a small business park, or a small office complex that would house some of the offices, or as Jessica mentioned, an embryo creating idea that would launch new businesses and launch new technologies. Of course, we have our rural business programs that's strictly focused at rural business. They have an energy initiative that will help you build energy efficiency services and expand in those areas. That spectrum of rural businesses covers any kind of business. And we cover the whole SIC code, the standard industry codes, with the types of businesses that we've financed. So we are really excited to be here and bring you those type of ideas as well. Now, also in rural business, like the SBIC, we are launching the Rural Business Investment Corporations. So we're looking to find entrepreneurs that will say, I'll make the commitment to just go in rural business. We're going partners with SBIC because SBIC can also go there. But what we're saying is there are folks that want to commit to rural, that want to make that investment in rural, and want to keep that wealth in rural. And from the farming sector, a lot of agriculture has wealth. And what we're finding is they're bringing their wealth to Wall Street to make their long-term investments. And we want to turn that around, and our secretary wants to turn that around. Our undersecretary and our administrator, Jessica, want to turn that around and say, let's bring those opportunities and help them stay in rural America. Now, I know some of you aren't in rural areas at the moment, but if you're in a larger area and you're going to serve somebody in rural, we will help you get there. So you might want to expand your scope of what you've been thinking about so that you could come and participate in our programs.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everyone. Let's start out. David, you said something that caught my attention. That was that 2011 was a record year for lending, which is great to hear. Comes at somewhat of a surprise. I mean, given how troubled the economy is, and what we've been hearing in terms of the tightness of financial institutions with respect to lending, particularly to small businesses. So, could you and Pat expand on that a little bit? Where have we seen that success, and why?
Sure. No, and I think it's an excellent question. And Pat can speak more to this as well. So as folks here probably know, SBA lending at its maximum accounts for roughly 5% of all small business lending in the U.S. economy. So it's significant, but it's not huge. And the second factor there is that 5% is really counter-cyclical. So when the economy is tough and other kind of traditional lenders and traditional lending freezes up, that's when folks turn to the SBA. So because we've seen a downturn in the economy and tightening of credit standards among banks, you'll see an increase in SBA lending. However, even for, let's say, this counter-cyclical run of the SBA, last year was still a record year. And that's something that we really want to promote and celebrate. The reason for that is, as part of our Small Business Jobs Act, we did a few things to make SBA lending or borrowing easier. So we raised the loan limits from $2 million to $5 million for 7A, and for much of last year, the borrower fees were waived, and the guarantees went up from 75% to 90%. So there were kind of incentives to really increase penetration of SBA lending. The fee waivers and the increased guarantees now no longer are in play, but the increased loan limit is still there. And it's really our hope that some more streamlining of SBA lending that's taking place even on the programmatic level that Patrick can talk about will really serve to expand SBA lending so that even when the economy is going gangbusters, we still will account for more than just a few percentage points of all small business lending.
Pat.
Yeah, so well, I think first thing, the obvious thing is there's more work to do, right? So I think what David is correct about is you know, we're given existing authority within the CAP access programs, and with the help of the Small Business Jobs Act, which Senator Landrieu was instrumental in, and President Obama signed into law last year. No question that it was a banner year for the SBA. But of course, as David points out, when it's a banner year for the SBA, not so banner for the rest of the country. So, you know, so we're humbled by our success and recognize we've got more work to do. And I think what David touched upon at the last part is, I think where the challenge for SBA going forward is we've welcomed back roughly 1,200 lenders to our lending base, our private partners. In other words, 1,200 lenders who had not made an SBA loan before or in recent history came back to use an SBA loan. That's important for underserved or underbanked areas across the country. But I think what we recognize is that we still have a lot of work to do. We have thousands of banks that do 1 or 2 loans a year with the SBA. We have 60 that have a total outstanding portfolio of over $100 million. So with roughly 7,700 banks under $10 billion in assets across the country, and about 5,000 participating at any given time in SBA. You know, there's more work to do to attract more banks to do that. And I think David's point is correct, that When you provide a guarantee program, the guarantee is a deficiency guarantee. In other words, if the borrower goes bust, the bank liquidates, and then we make the lender whole up to 75% of that deficiency. In terms of the documentation requirements that the government requires, in addition to what the banks are ordinarily doing conventionally, that significantly increases their transaction costs. And particularly on the loans under $250,000, the margins have gotten tighter and tighter on those loans. And any business is going to look at any department in that business and look at your return on equity and your investment. And so we've got to be mindful of that, and I think some of the changes that we made in the most recent update to our loan guidelines reflect that. We are trying to migrate the 7A program to the best practices that our numbers demonstrate, move the needle. And we've had great success over the years with SBA Express in terms of the application requirements for both lender and borrower, and the flexibility it affords the lenders to manage, to utilize their own conventional underwriting and collateral monitoring. And that's important to a borrower, because if the bank can do something easy and obviously mitigate their downside risk, they're more inclined to make a loan. And certainly what David was talking about with the fee waiver and the increased guarantee that was also in the Recovery Act and extended in the Jobs Act played a big part in incentivizing lenders to lend when the credit market seized. And I think the last part I'll say is that the working capital piece that we have redesigned, interestingly enough, that program was originated after the first Bush recession. So we had the first Bush recession in 91, 92, and then Erskine Bowles, who was the administrator under President Clinton in his first term, worked to develop an asset-based lending line, a working capital line, because the recovery was underway. But as you recall, in 92 and 93, we were getting out of the first Bush recession. Well, the second Bush recession has come and gone, and we're now in the recovery phase from that. And as a result, we're right back where we started, focusing on working capital for businesses, and that's important for businesses to manage their cash cycle. When they can manage their cash cycle, they can hire people. It's a little bit about that.
You mentioned, both you and David have mentioned the 7A and 504 programs. Can we flesh those out just a little bit in terms of the nuts and bolts of those programs? If I'm a woman-owned or minority-owned company, why am I looking at those vehicles in particular, and how do I qualify?
I think any small business is eligible, and the eligibility depends on a couple different things. Your industry type, so there's classifications within what industry you're in as to what constitutes a small business. Another great provision of the Small Business Jobs Act that President Obama signed into law, and obviously David's committee helped get passed, was the alternative size standard, and that alternative size standard makes many, many more small businesses eligible. So it's quite broad, first off. The reason that a woman-owned business or a minority-owned business may need an SBA loan guarantee is because historically folks that have been disadvantaged, this gives banks an opportunity to feel like they've covered more of their risk. Our programs across the board over-index to women and minority-owned businesses, I think to the tune of like 56% of our total borrowers. And with respect to 7A or 504, a 7A loan would be appropriate for real estate, or it would be appropriate for a piece of machinery and equipment. What's attractive about both the 7A and the 504 program for the small business borrower is that it allows the bank to provide a much longer term, which allows the loan to amortize over the lifetime of what they're financing, whether it's the real estate or the machinery and equipment, or for working capital. So I think if for those folks that are looking to plug into SBA and learn more about the products, we have 68 district offices across the country, as well as small business development centers, which we provide 50% of the funding for, women development centers, veteran-owned development centers all across the country. And all of these resource partners can help you if you're starting a business, develop a business plan, and figure out who in that neck of the woods is an SBA lending partner. In order to be an SBA lending partner, it's pretty simple. If you're a state or a federally chartered bank, you are eligible to become a SBA lender. So.
And if I could just add one other advantage, which Patrick touched on. So what I did not mention is before I came to DC, before I joined the Hill, working first on the House side, now on the Senate side, I was a corporate attorney doing finance and lending work, and to a large part doing commercial real estate financings. And one of the things that struck me when I first learned about the 504 program is it's really a hidden gem of the SBA. So without SBA financing, without the 504 program, if you are going to do a commercial real estate acquisition and a financing, you will generally get a 5 to 7 year term loan, and it's going to be a variable interest rate. Okay, so it's a short-term loan and variable. The real advantage of the SBA's 504 program is that it's long-term, so it can be up to 20, 25 years, and it's fixed. So folks in the commercial real estate industry who could qualify for a 504 loan, which of course you have to be a small business for, have a significant advantage over the kind of standard, the industry standard of a much shorter term variable interest rate. And on that note, one of the provisions in our bill was to allow for the first time ever the ability to refinance a 504 through the 504 program. So historically, 504 was only for acquisition financing, and starting in the past 6 months, for the first time ever, you are now able to refinance through the program, which we think is another unique and significant aspect of SBA lending.
Thomas, if I can add something, as great as the 7A and the 504 programs are, they really do little for communications companies, or certainly small businesses that are interested in acquiring TV, radio, wireless licenses just by nature of it. I commend the improvements in those loans, but nonetheless, they really don't cover some of the major expenses for a new entrant, certainly, or a small business to acquire a license. By their very nature, they don't cover licensing acquisition, whether it's on a secondary market, which means you purchase it from somebody else, or whether it's purchased at auction. Those revenues are not available. By nature of the loans, a new entrant, just starting out, may not have the revenue to generate, to service a loan. So a loan may not do them very good from the very beginning. Loans are really for established businesses, not necessarily new entrants. So the problem is, how does a small communications business finance the acquisition or continuing operations? If a radio TV licensee is interested in purchasing location for a new tower, then the 504 loan may be formidable, may be great, but not until then. One of the biggest problems are that the license, an FCC license, cannot be used as collateral. And quite frankly, preferred and certified SBA lenders, I have great respect for them. They're already pro-small business, but they don't understand the communications business. I would love to see a joint program between the FCC, SBA, RUS, to educate preferred and certified lenders as to the business of broadcasting, the business of wireless. They're great businesses. They generate lots of revenue. They generate lots of jobs, but those small businesses are struggling because they don't qualify for the traditional loans.
Yeah, so I think good comments. So first off, I slightly disagree with the startup thing, because we do lots of financing of startups, those businesses where the cash flow is based totally on projections. I agree with you on some of the licensing points. I think what's interesting to note is Deputy Administrator Johns just stood up an underserved council, and the chairwoman of the underserved council is, of course, Kathy Hughes, who, as many of you know from Radio 1, started Radio 1 with a 504 loan. And celebrates small business lending as responsible for her success in the communications industry.
The
So,
majority of her capital came from a venture capital firm called Syncom and OCP.
Right.
That's how she qualified for the 504. She had to get her money someplace else first.
well, she had to conform to the rules where we require a small business borrower to have 10% equity, we require a third-party lender, and then the SBA debenture covers 40% of it, which is important because you can't buy a piece of real estate with 90% LTV. So I think your comments are helpful, and I'll definitely take that back to Ms. Hughes. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do with the underserved council is look for opportunities to broaden that. But with respect to startups, all of our programs, a startup are eligible. Where the 504 program, we do look for going concerns. Startups are not eligible there, because the program was contemplated for economic development, job creation, and job retention, different program than 7A. But if you are looking for $25,000 to buy yourself a job or start a business, that's where a 7A loan can come in. And, that's...
Which programs would promote, say, marketing and promotional and operational costs?
If you have a service company, which is what I think you're referring to, and you have projected financials and accounts, the financing for the working capital, you have accounts receivable or contracts, so you're performing marketing or services for a private entity or a purchase order to do that. All of that financing is eligible, and you can obtain that under a 7A loan.
But if you have no revenue and no accounts payable and none of that, then you're stuck until you get started, correct?
Well, if you're not a business, then if you don't have, so if you have an idea in a business plan, and you have projected financials, and you have some sweat equity to put into that, or you've borrowed some money to bootstrap, or you've used a business credit card to get your business started, and you have a forecast of potential clients, then yes, you can be financed. But if you don't have any business plan or projections of how you're going to grow your business and no foreseeable accounts receivable, yeah, I think the financing would be tough to obtain from.
Oh, of course.
And so I think it may be helpful to point out that there are other programs in addition to 7A and 504 that would be perhaps more appropriate for startups, despite the fact that there are some startups who can get financing through the traditional loan guarantee programs with the SBA, and some new programs that actually we've just put into place over the past year. And I can just speak briefly to that. So within the SBA, as you know, there's and as Gary mentioned, there's the SBIC program, which is a small business investment company program, and this is a program that backs government-backed venture capital funds. And so if you are an SBIC, which is essentially a venture fund, you have access to financing through the SBA, and then the decision will ultimately be yours as an investment fund to invest in startups or broadcasting companies or lots of the folks who are here. So the SBIC program is one channel for this other type of financing we're talking about.
And in fact, Kathy Hughes, I believe the venture capital funds that invested in her from the very beginning were SBICs. Many of the initial venture capital funds were SBICs because they were guaranteed through the SBA.
That's exactly right. So
Yeah.
so that's a program that exists to get to the type of companies we're talking about. The second program, which as I mentioned is really entirely new, was also part of our Small Business Jobs Bill, which was signed in September of 2010. And this is a program called the State Small Business Credit Initiative, creatively called the SSBCI. And as part of the State Small Business Credit Initiative, the government allocated $1.5 billion to be distributed to states across the country. And in order for a state to qualify for this federal funding, they had to prove that a program they were either currently running or they were creating would be able to leverage $1, or for every $1 of federal funding, that could get to $10 of small business lending or small business investing. And so under this program, and I actually have the numbers here for Maryland and Virginia, which I assume there are some folks here, the state of
Maryland actually has a state-run venture capital program. And Maryland qualified and received $23 million through the state economic development entity. They have two other programs that this money is being used for, but about $6.5 million has gone to the state-run venture program. Virginia does not have a venture program, but they're using that money for a capital access program, so another state-run program that helps small businesses get access to capital. Virginia got $17 million, and I'm hoping that there are some folks here from the district. One of the things that, as a resident of D.C., we're always very conscious of is that the district often gets overlooked in federal programs. So D.C. also qualified for $13 million and received $13 million as part of this program. So I think that the point is well taken. Perhaps the traditional asset-based lending programs that the government is used to doing may not serve every company, small business out there. And part of that is because their partner in this case, or in the 7A and 504, are banks. Right, and so banks are do the traditional asset-based lending, and so the real challenge is to identify programs that can help the companies that we're talking about, and the hope is that over the next couple of years we'll see this $1.5 billion that we just allocated, that states just got. We hope that will be continued to be used to help these state-run venture programs.
I've got a question for you, and then I've got a couple questions here for Gary. But before I go to the questions for Gary, you raised a general point, the tension that exists in terms of the challenges for traditional broadcast owners and radio and television getting funding, getting loans, and the vehicles that are available through SBA. I know you've done a fair amount of work on the Telecommunications Development Fund, which was a product of the '96 Telecom Act. We had Jim Pastoriza here last year talk about the fund, and at that point I think they had about $80 million in invested assets or available funds, and 78 million of which had been invested. And there was an issue there as well in terms of whether there was investment in television and radio, at least with respect to private equity. We talked about that with our private equity panel as well. So if you could talk about TDF, where it is now, what's left of it, if anything, what are the challenges, sort of what the FCC should be thinking about with respect to that fund, and to the extent that TDF and other private equity investors are not looking at TV and radio, what are the problems?
Certainly. Thank you, Thomas. First of all, small businesses can have big dreams. And where will we be today without a few small businesses created years ago called Microsoft, Google, Facebook? They all had to get their start somewhere. And many of the new technology and certainly the new telecommunications businesses, again, because traditional opportunities for capital aren't necessarily there, TDF was created, as Thomas said, in 1996 to address those concerns, particularly since the 1996 Act was a boon to big businesses. It laid the foundation for convergence and consolidation of the telecommunications industry. But Congress was concerned that small businesses, particularly minority and women-owned businesses, would be left behind. So they created Section 257 of the Telecommunications Act, which is to eliminate market entry barriers, is the FCC mandate, and of course TDF, which are Sections 707 and 714. The TDF requirements, statutory requirements, are to promote access to capital for small business in order to enhance competition in the telecommunications industry, to stimulate new technology development and promote employment and training, and to support universal service and promote delivery of telecommunications services to underserved rural and urban areas. Now, telecom is defined very broadly for TDF. It's not just TV, radio, as well as cable, wireless, wireline, satellite, internet. TDF is capitalized primarily from upfront deposits when the FCC conducts an auction. That's how the Commission distributes new licensing, is through a competitive bidding process. The Commission has had, I believe, 92 auctions since 1994. So if you can see, there are not that many auctions, even though there have been some pretty big ones. So there's interest earned from those deposits for people that want to participate, which means TDF has not received a lot of money overall, maybe $110 million in the past, since the 1996 Act. So it's limited in funds, and because it's limited in funds, it has had to distribute its money very judiciously. It makes it makes investments, private equity, venture capital investments, ranging from $500,000 to $5 million. So it's small amounts of capital, but sometimes very important for a new entrant to start. It does not make loans, even though it has the authority to do so, basically because under its statute, it has to comply with the Federal Credit Reform Act, which has certain requirements for lending prerequisites for companies in order to secure loans. And again, these are startup businesses, yes, with business plans, with projections, with equity investments. Some of them come from their own friends and family, angels, etc., but they don't have any revenue yet, so they can't service a loan. Right now, TDF has 15 portfolio companies, still going strong, still getting the interest earned from the past few auctions. There have been a little bit of money. They are very active in providing underserved communities. TDF has also been profitable. It's making money. The percentage of jobs in terms of increases on an annual growth is 26%, which means TDF is creating jobs. And I don't know too many other equity investments, the government equity investments, that are creating those jobs at that rate. The companies are sometimes very small, new technology companies coming up with new uses of technology for digital streaming. Some of them have, in fact, one in particular, which I really like, is called UMA, out of Belmont, California, out of Palo Alto, California. They created a revolutionary device that allows you to call anywhere in the United States with no monthly fees. Now, that was a service not created by the big telcos. That was created by a small business who needed TDF to get started. TDF is in danger of being closed out. It is vulnerable. There are several bills to basically defund TDF. There's a concern with the revenue deficit, with the financial deficit, which of course is important. But at the same time, TDF has filled a gap that no one else has been able to fill because of the small equity investments, because it's pro-small business, and it's patient capital. Granted, it may be venture capital, but it's still patient capital. If TDF is not funded anymore, if it does not continue to get auction revenue, it will have to raise money elsewhere, like any other venture capital fund, which means it goes to investors, to banks, to pension funds, to other limited partner liability areas and all that. Right now, TDF has not invested currently in a TV or radio station. It was originally anticipated to be able to fund licensing. Again, back in 1996, we had very low minority and women ownership in television and radio. In fact, we have worse numbers now. But that's tough. That's really tough for TDF to invest in radio and TV because that business model, although it still remains a good one, with the emphasis on advertising revenue, when the advertising market crashed in 2009, a lot of current radio and TV stations are struggling. So it is not necessarily the best return on investment long-term for TDF, but they're continuing to look at it. They have invested in service providers to those radio and TV stations, again, for digital licensing as well. They're also, the foundation, as I mentioned, has received revenue from profits from TDF and has invested in many ways to close that digital divide. I think Commissioner Cobbs talked about broadband adoption as one of the biggest concerns. TDF has, the foundation, has invested in training and started up broadband and computer centers in many urban areas that have not been able to receive government funding or other government support. There's one in Baltimore in the Douglas Homes, which is it's the projects, which they've invested in a computer lab. I know universal service funds are often considered a conflict with TDF or duplicative of TDF, but universal service funds usually don't provide training or they don't provide teachers, whereas TDF has been able to provide training and persons to help with the broadband adoption parts of it. As I mentioned, TDF is the risk of being closed out. It's proposed to be eliminated in President Obama's 2011 budget because it's in conflict or duplicative of U.S. universal service funds. It's not successful, but as I mentioned, it's creating jobs at a 26% annual growth, as well as TDF is investing in not just training for broadband, but it's also one of the investors in the National Association Broadcasters Educational Foundation for training new owners and new leaders in TV and radio, the Broadcast Leadership Training Program, which I'm a very proud alum. Did I address all your questions?
You did. You did. You mentioned one thing. You said, it's on the chopping block, which it has been in the last couple of years, and,
right.
and Jim Pastries and others at the fund have been able to preserve it. You mentioned it hasn't been successful, or I may be misconstruing.
One of the criticisms has been that TDF has not, the use of its funds has not been to the greatest success. But I note that TDF is a venture capital organization, and not every venture VC firm hits it out of the ballpark with every one of its investments. Your standard VC capital firm, if they invest in 10 companies in a year, maybe 5 will be successful, but 5 will be wildly successful, offsetting the 5 that were not. That's just the nature of the venture capital business. I note that TDF is currently outperforming the public market and outperforming other venture capital funds. It is very successful today in the 15 companies that it's doing. And the fact that it's not successful, I'm not sure how you gauge success when you're looking at 20 or so new technology companies through the years that are providing services and products that no one else has developed. These are innovative products, and it's creating, again, a 26% annual job growth. I also note that the money TDF gets, that percentage interest from upfront funds, I don't know how many of you looked at your savings account recently, but I'm getting less than 1% return on my account. So TDF is not earning a lot of interest money. I would submit that maybe $50 million over the past 5 years, 6 years, maybe, is better served in the hands of new developing small businesses. It does little to offset the trillions of dollars in deficit that we're in right now. And TDF is doing things that no one else is. It's filling a gap that no one else did. It did so in 1996, which is the reason why it was created, and that need is even more important today.
I'm going to go to a couple questions from the audience. This is from Franklin, is it Cumberbatch? Cumberbatch, okay. Trinidad Group, rural broadband and telemedicine platform business owner. His question is, how do we coordinate the need for broadband infrastructure and services and available resources? And I take it that you mean sort of the lack of available resources?
The lack of the coordination of, I'm based in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
I have a cloud-based telemedicine platform, but my need might be in rural Virginia.
Okay.
I don't necessarily have to serve where I am. So how do we coordinate where the needs are throughout the country? Because then you create local jobs, technical services, etc., and grow these businesses. So the thing I'd like to hear discussed is how do we, as entrepreneurs, work with administrations to have that coordination to say, we see no response in community X, but you are doing something that we are funding. I think you sit in that hub space where by making that connection, we increase the probability of creating jobs and supplying that need to the country, as opposed to individuals only focused on that small microcosm of the
Gary, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I'd like to start. In fact, I don't know if you could tell, I was like wanting to jump in every, say, and rural, and rural, and rural. But one of the things that nobody really perceives if you're not out there in rural America is the USDA footprint, right? And just in rural development, we have over 5,000 employees in over 500 offices around the country. And they're all a network for answering that question. They're on the ground, they live in those communities, they know which ones might need telemedicine. So the first step that I would recommend is we'll start, you're in Wisconsin, let's start with Wisconsin, make sure all of rural Wisconsin is covered. The state director in rural Wisconsin knows the other 46 state directors. Some states are small and they cover several areas. And I don't see why we couldn't put a really good network of folks who have the need on one side and have the demand on the other side. And with the telemedicine, remember, that's always got to be part of the equation. There's someone who has a qualified set of experts at one end of the telemedicine call, and then there's this little office you walk in and you look at a camera and say, ah, and that other person in the really urban area is looking and assessing that particular evaluation of that patient. So there might be a nurse there running a satellite office to connect up with a major university hospital that has the expertise to answer that question. But again, you can go to our website. I've got some handouts here of just where our state offices are, and you click on there and it'll put you right in a local community.
Gary, Jessica had mentioned the Distance Learning Telemedicine Grant Awards.
Yes.
Will those awardees be listed on your website, and their location and the scope of what they're getting the grants for?
Yes, and that would be the other end of
Okay.
it. You went through our history and seen what we've done in that area. I think we've put over, it only started with the Farm Bill, and we've got, I want to say $98 million out there already working on this, and one end of the connection or another, and add another node to it, if you talk about your cloud connection, would probably be something relatively inexpensive that we'd like to fund.
I've got another question from, this is for you, Gary, again. It's from Richard Scott of Pi Omni Media. This is relative to the Rural Business Initiative corporation efforts. Is the USDA directly involved in distributing these funds, or will you direct my company to an outside entity which has a vested interest in providing the funds on behalf of your program?
Okay, we do both types of funds. We do direct loan funds, but one of the things that we want to do and has made some of our loans successful is that we help the entrepreneur connect with its community. So sometimes your community, if you get together with a team in your community and say, we'd like to apply for a rural business economic grant, we may give them a pot of money and say, you guys lend that to the people you know in your community. So we're creating a little micro lending operation there that would help you. When you're connected with your community, then we know you have users in your community that would be excited about bringing the products there. So part of your business model could be that. But you could come and get direct. You could bring a bank. We'll do a loan guarantee to banks. That's mostly what we do. Although we have direct money, we also have grants to help your community get started in that area. Now we have a program. If you're in rural America, you are either getting your electricity from one of our rural electric co-ops or your telecommunications from one of our rural telecommunications co-ops. We have a program called Rural Economic Loan and Grant Program that we work with those co-ops. So that'd be another connection that you would make in your community. Go to your local co-op, see if they already have this lending program. If not, help them get it, and they could make the loan directly to you. They're trying to provide economic stability in the areas that they're serving. So a combination of things from different aspects of our rural development family.
And again, I think Gary's handouts will be available. We'll just have those on the table as you leave, so you can pick those up. This question says, does government monitor equity from SBDCs in rural areas? And why can't the direct, and I believe this says, why can't the direct BNI, why can't the direct BNI be restarted since so few businesses in rural areas are financed by banks? And that's from Bill Branham. That would be from, I guess that'd be for David and Patrick.
I can't talk to the B&I program, and my sense of the SBDCs is that it would likely be publicly available information how much money has gone to each individual small business development center. And so for folks who are not familiar with this program, small business development centers are essentially consulting firms for small businesses. They're very often housed at universities or at other academic centers, often in rural areas, and they receive funding through our committee and through the SBA. And so if the question is to determine how much funding each SBDC receives, that's certainly publicly available. But is there some other part of the?
Actually, what I'm trying to find out, the equity money to small businesses, there's no, that might be wrong phrase that I'm trying to say, that's the way I got it phrased. What I want to know is how much equity small businesses are getting, minority small businesses, because I'm from South Florida, and there's no equity.
Okay. So I actually do not have a specific answer to equity, so money being invested and not being lent. But I guess the kind of second part of the corollary of that is there are efforts underway to track exactly how much money is being lent. So lending and not equity. So debt versus equity. And that debt tracking system is through this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that I had mentioned at the beginning. This is a new entity that was created as part of the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Bill that passed in July of 2010. And one of the requirements of this new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is to track precisely how much money loan applications as well as loans made to small businesses, women-owned and minority-owned businesses, and I think you're hitting on an important point, which is the data we have tracking how much or how many loans these businesses are getting. We actually do not have great data on it. And I was at a conference recently at the Federal Reserve, and different Federal Reserve banks each to deliver their own papers. And one guy was from the Fed in D.C., one guy was from the Fed in Atlanta, the other was from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And each of these Federal Reserve banks had done their own individual studies on small business lending. But what that suggested is that there has got to be a more centrally created resource or depot for tracking this information on the national level.
So a couple of things. First off, Georgia has been particularly hard hit by the credit crisis in that I think the last time I was down there was about 50 banks that were in receivership. So there's been a huge amount of, you think about that for a second, and that's a huge number. And that was the result of the fallout of kind of the asset bubble with the residential mortgage crisis. Many of those banks participated in that to their detriment. So it's a tough time in Georgia for sure. The second thing I'll say with respect to debt, so not equity but debt, you can go to SBA.gov and put in your zip code, and it will give you the opportunity to look within your state by either loans or volume exactly which banks are partnering with the SBA and in your state. So, and you can search by either way. The other thing is you can also find your local district office, and the lead lender relationship specialist is a good person to plug into. I think the other thing that I'll say with respect to tracking data too, and why and I think Dodd-Frank is a great step in the right direction, and certainly the Consumer Protection Bureau is going to be a good addition. But banks themselves track what defines a small business very differently too. I mentioned earlier that we partnered with 13 to do an announcement, and they were going to incrementally increase loan origination the remainder of this calendar year and the next 2 calendar years by $20 billion. Well, on the conventional side, Some banks define small businesses as 20 million in revenue or less. Some define it at 10 million. Some define it at 5. Some define it at 1. That's a vast range, right? Of course, and I think we could all find a business in each of those categories and kind of scratch our head and say, is that really a small business? When you think about a startup or a mom and pop on Main Street. So I think we're doing the right thing, which is trying to track, because what you track, what you measure, you'll try to perform to. So.
If I can add, equity comes from so many different sources, not just government sources, but friends, family, angels, venture capital firms. So it's difficult to track in one fell swoop. However, courtesy of the Office of Advocacy, Small Business Administration, there's a handout there that will give you some statistics that advocacy has compiled from different sources, such as the Kauffman Foundation. There are certain entities that look at overall industry trends, and I encourage you to pick this one-sheeter up. Excuse me, it's more than one-sheeter. There's 2 reports on credit, but this is a multiple and I think a very comprehensive overview of the status for investments, business finance. In fact, there's one that's figure 4, that's the share of small business financing dollars for startup firms, and it gives you the percentage breakdown of owner equity versus owner family loan, personal loan, outsider equity, personal credit, so it does give you some statistics. I also encourage you to look at the National Association of Investment Companies, which is a wonderful traders organization of those venture capital and private equity firms that invest in minority and women businesses and emerging markets. And I see my friend and colleague Anita Stevens-Graham is here. She's on the second panel. She is the former chair of that organization. They may also have additional resources and information for you, particularly for Georgia or your particular industry.
Last question from the audience. I've got, it says here, this will be for Patrick. And David, I think you can probably chime in here as well. The SBA recently rejected SBIC approval of African American-led groups, Peak versus SBA. Is that familiar to you both? No?
It's not.
Okay. It says, with this barrier, what internal changes with regard to management and oversight is SBA employing to increase SBIC approval of African American-led groups?
So I'm not familiar with that situation, and so I don't want to comment on a particular matter. And what I would do is, I'm free to talk to anybody afterwards, talk offline. Sean Green, who administers the SBIC program, and Ellen Kim, who is my counterpart in that division, I'm sure would be happy to talk to anybody about a specific question like that. I will say though that I do know that the SBIC department has done 2 things over the last two different funds announcements as part of Startup America. One is the Early Stage Innovation Fund, which is designed to go at what they popularly is understood to be the valley of death, that period of time between you've bootstrapped your way to a going concern, but you're not mature or seasoned enough to really attract significant VC money. So you're kind of in that phase before commercialization, most likely, some of what you were describing earlier. And they have taken $200 million per year of existing budget authority over 5 years and focused it specifically on attracting SBICs to target that area. The other SBIC focus that was launched earlier this year, and I think the first selection was in Michigan, is where 90 or 95% of the counties in Michigan are LMI. So that was one of the reasons that they went there. But it's the Social Impact Fund, where again, $200 million of existing SBA, SBIC authority is allocated over 5 years each year, specifically for social impact fund investing, where again, we're attracting SBICs targeted at underserved communities, underserved populations. I think that that's probably what Ellen or Sean would say, and they'd probably say it better and give you a little more facts. But I'd be happy to make sure connect anybody to those folks afterwards. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that Pete versus the SBA was a case that was recently settled, where the SBA settled saying that they in fact had discriminated and allowed the guy to become licensed.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, access to capital is a key for minorities, especially African Americans, and we have none. So the program that you just outlined is something I'm very interested in.
Sure. Sure. I think. Yeah. Go ahead.
And I think I can't speak to that specific case, nor can I speak to the individuals who have been rejected. I do know for a fact that I personally have spoken to SBIC applicants, minority SBIC applicants who in fact have been approved. And so I don't know if that's kind of post, Pete versus SBA, and as part of kind of a new recognition, but I do know for a fact that there have been recent approvals. Okay, so
the decision probably, but the settlement.
But I guess the larger point is I know that there have been approvals recently, and as part of this impact investing program within the SBIC program, that's got a lot of potential. Again, I think it's important to point out there's no new budget authority there, but it's a renewed focus on low and moderate income areas.
We've only got a couple more minutes in this hour, so I sort of have one or combined general last question. I'm going to give you all an opportunity to kind of give your closing remarks. But one question I do have is that the FCC, SBA, and SCORE, which is the Service Corps of Retired Executives, are engaged in an effort to train small businesses to adopt and maximize their use of broadband. And my question is this: how else can the SBA, our agency, and SCORE and Rural Utility Service work together to implement programs that create opportunities for small and diverse business owners? And I'd love for you all to speak to that issue and any closing comments you have to offer for our audience.
Start that.
Sure. I love interagency partnerships, and I would love to see more transparency related to the communications and telecommunications industry, because those businesses are quite different than some of the mom and pop and retail based stores that you'll see. Again, the licensing requirements, the capital requirements, the construction build out requirements, all those things are unique to the communications sector. And yet the communications sector is the most important and most, I think, largest sector in the United States. Every small business, every single individual small business needs broadband, telephone, et cetera. So that's why getting the foundation of the communications industry part diverse, competitive, will help all small businesses. If I can also remark on one thing that the FCC can do is to recommit to the designated entity program. Designated entities are small businesses, minority, women-owned, and rural telcos that was created under 309J, Section 309J of the Communications Act. That program, that statutory mandate, speaks to avoiding excessive concentration of licenses and promoting competition across the country. And diversity, of course, is an important component, as Commissioner Kopp said. That DE program has been under challenge. There have been rules adopted by the FCC which are no longer on the books, but there's a need to, again, recommit to that DE program. I also note that there is a pending bills for the incentive auctions for broadcast spectrum to be incentivized to be sold for use of broadband. There are, of course, pros and cons to that, but there's language in some of the bills that will, I think, effectively wipe out the DE program, which is unfortunate. The designated entity program is, again, helps small businesses, new entrants, level the playing field when they compete against larger businesses in an auction scenario. The FCC traditionally has provided bidding credits, particular spectrum allocations, ways for small businesses to compete against the big guys. And there's language in what's the Walden Bill, which is the Jobs Opportunity Broadband Act, that could effectively change that. which would require or restrict the FCC from providing such incentives to DEs. And that's something I think the Commission may not be aware of, but would love to see the Commission, as well as Senator Landrieu, who I know is very supportive of small business and telecommunications, to prevent or to at least take a look at a much more closer basis. Thank you.
So, first off, I want to say this has been a good panel, and I definitely learned something, and I think I'd like to connect with you and Deputy Johns to connect the two of you and get involved with some of the questions around telecommunications companies, because I think what her intent with exploring access to capital issues through the Underserved Council is exactly that. Should we rethink some of the ways that we approach this? But I think on the build-out thing, one thing I have not mentioned, which is another program that we administer, which is important, is surety bonding as well. And so when you're trying to build something, surety bonding is very important. And one of the things we're trying to work with Congress on is to raise the program or the limits on how much bonding can be supported. That was one of the things that was not raised, as David alluded to earlier. We raised our loan limits from $2 million to $5 million, but our surety bonding program did not get the same permanent raise. And it's an important part of infrastructure for sure, and for our contractors. And now that we've got a financing tool where the proceeds of that financing can support paying for the surety bonding, we ought to be able to match a $5 million revolver with a $5 million bonding. I think the last thing I'll say with respect to what we're trying to do in terms of broadening and deepening both interagency partnerships and then with the private sector and the public-private partnership is through Community Advantage. As many of you have probably read, Howard Schultz and Starbucks a few weeks ago, pre-Thanksgiving, partnered with the Opportunity Finance Network, which represents 180 nonprofit mission-based lenders nationwide. Starbucks put up $5 million of their own money, and they are now selling Livestrong-esque, the kind of yellow bracelets, but this one is white at their local retail shops. And when I say selling, it's you give a donation, and they are giving those donation dollars to the Opportunity Finance Network to disperse amongst their membership, which will go directly into the lending funds of those institutions. I think that's a fascinating development. There are many, many corporations that are not in the business of being a bank that are sitting on a tremendous amount of cash, and we've all read about that. So what the administration is trying to do is organize that energy to help develop this platform. And when I say platform, there are 100 or so, 180 commercial lending nonprofit institutions. There are 260 roughly or so certified development companies that the SBA administers, and another 100 or so SBA certified microlenders. And so we envision a future through Community Advantage where our bank partners, our largest bank partners, and we're having a meeting at the Treasury on Monday afternoon. We have Donna Gambrell, who's the director of that program, and Deputy Johns from the SBA, and 14 major banks and about 34 of these mission-based lenders. And the idea is for the banks to provide those Community Advantage lenders with warehouse lines of credit, patient capital that they can then deploy in microloans, loan loss reserve grants so that they can support those loans, and technical assistance grants, which of course helps pre and post origination for that borrower to make good on their payments and thrive as a business, and of course work with our resource partners. So we're in the early days of this, but you can imagine an opportunity of everyone saying where are the gaps. These nonprofit mission-based vendors already lend to startups, already do the $5,000 loan or the $6,000 loan to the person with the dream that doesn't have a sophisticated strategy yet but has a pretty good idea, is in the community, will get the technical assistance from the resource partners. And so these folks are already doing that, and that's why Starbucks sought out OFN, or Opportunity Finance Network. We believe that the 7A program is going to really turbocharge this, because that nonprofit mission-based lender will be able to take advantage of the same 7A advantages that community banks have taken with, which is it's a great source of liquidity. You can take the 85% guarantee, sell that guaranteed portion on the secondary market, and if you've drawn down $100,000, you sell an 85% guaranteed the second day, you get $93,000 back. You've almost repaid the line instantaneously. Then you receive servicing fees on that loan as part of going forward. So what that's going to do for those entities is it's going to do the same thing it does for banks. It's going to incentivize them to make more cash flow loans. Those entities that don't have collateral are going to get more loans on the micro level, and they're going to bring their expertise of community development to bear, and they're going to over-index to what they already over-index to, is the most underserved borrowers across rural, urban, wherever. So we've got CDCs from Montana, we've got CDFIs like Axion in different states, and so forth, and Mississippi Delta. All of these folks are participating. So I think that's the most exciting thing that the SBA has engaged in, and I think the next 3 years developing that platform and herding the private capital to that space to align with a national priority, which is small business lending, is important.
And I just should take the opportunity to thank, of course, Director Reed, but I know also Calvin Osborne, I think, has been the main force contacting all of us. So thank you very much for making this happen. Just very briefly, I had mentioned earlier that the environment is intensely political. So what I mentioned perhaps last year was just one example of that on the Hill, which is different, of course, than being in an agency, but on the Hill, everything is very political down to office space. So I have an office that has no windows, so I have no natural daylight, and I stare into a kind of a curved wall. You know how all the office buildings are curved, so I get vertigo all day, which is not a great office. But my Republican counterpart, who's in the minority, has it a bit worse. His office actually used to be a men's bathroom. So it's intensely political, right? And so our committee, as I mentioned, is one of the unique or kind of areas of hope where there's a lot of collaboration between the two sides, right? But this is just the way it is on the Hill, and so we're always struggling to kind of break past that. But that's a real challenge. One of the things that I guess has come out after the summer debt disaster, there are a few proposals out there that have come over from the House side that are now making their way over to the Senate. One of these proposals is this crowdfunding idea, which could be taken advantage of if passed by folks here, which is essentially a way to get access to capital through the internet. So through your social media network, you can actually, raise $1,000 per investment. Now, this is not happening yet. It's passed the House, and we're now looking at it on the Senate side. I mention it because you had asked about interagency collaboration and what can we do. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, of course, would be the main agency that would determine and has so far determined that crowdfunding would actually not be possible under current regulations. What I think would be helpful, and this is where you come in, is where the constituent groups and the business folks who support these ideas, who are behind these ideas, instead of only going to the SEC, which of course would be the main kind of depot for these issues, if you were able, when you have an idea such as this, to also contact other agencies, such as the FCC, right, whose companies, whose small businesses affiliated or working with the FCC could also benefit from something like this. You could then get other agencies collaborating and lending support to the SEC in evaluating and determining whether such a proposal is feasible. So look, I mean, we're on the other side. So right, you got Congress is kind of on the other side from the agencies and departments, but we're always looking to increase collaboration between us and the departments and between the various departments and agencies. So I'd I'd hope that we're always looking to become more efficient in that effort.
Yeah, and I just to echo David's comments, we're in complete support of crowdfunding. So we are very much in those discussions. Obviously, we don't, as we don't administer it, but we're doing whatever we can to influence that, because for all the reasons that it makes sense. So, yep.
Again, I'm very proud to be here and thankful to be with this great team. Like I mentioned, we have this footprint throughout the United States, and at the same time we were launching some of the big Recovery Act programs, we started to launch what we would call local regional convenings work. So our state directors are pretty familiar with bringing together teams of folks. In addition, we have what we call general field reps, and these are experts in the telecommunications business. That's all they do. They understand loan packages. They understand the financial projections from all of these entities. In addition to that, we asked each state director to set up their own broadband specialist to help on this build on to the broadband network. So I believe if you called any state director, you would get with open arms them welcoming you to help them facilitate a convening to bring both the federal resources together, your community resources together, and hopefully other small businesses that could help you launch that as well.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, audience, for your questions. I apologize for the couple I couldn't get to in the time that we have, but we've got an illustrious group here, so I thank you, Janelle and Patrick and David and Gary, for giving us your time and your expertise this morning. And I know Patrick and Gary will be here this afternoon, a little bit longer, having individual sessions with some of the businesses that are here. So thank you very much. Well, I could. I see it's close to 11. We've gone a little bit over, so I think we'll take about a 10-minute break. A couple of announcements. Those of you who are here who have afternoon sessions, please see Karen Beverly. I think Karen is here. I'm not sure where she is, but if you check with Calvin and Karen, she'll have your schedules for the afternoon breakout sessions. And I think there are refreshments in, was it 402? So I think it's straight back there. I've got 11 o'clock. Why don't we reconvene at about 10 after 11, give everybody a chance to take a quick break. All right. Thank you. Okay. All right, we're going to get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to get started with our second panel. This is our private equity and VC panel. Bless you. We are very privileged to have you all here. In a moment, I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to talk about their companies, their backgrounds, their investment strategy. But the purpose of this panel is to really talk a little bit about our current economic environment, investment opportunities in in this environment, how small players, new entrants, women and minority-owned businesses can take the most advantage of investment opportunities, how you should position yourselves to be as attractive as possible to investment companies. So we have with us Anita Stevens-Graham from Opportunity Capital and Reginald Griner from Avondale Ventures. We've got Jim Downey from Hunter Wise and Mark Grovich. Is it Grovich or Grovic? Grovic from New Market Ventures, and Brian Milan from Whitestone Capital. So I'm going to get started again. I have a number of questions, but I certainly welcome all of you to submit your questions to these panelists, and hopefully we'll have some questions coming online from individuals out there as well. So with that, I'm going to get started. Reginald, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. As Thomas said, I'm Reg Griner. I'm a partner with Avondale Ventures. We're a lower middle market private equity firm. based in Washington, D.C., and we focus on lower middle market companies. So that's typically companies generating anywhere from, it could be anywhere from $5 million to $30 million in revenue is our core strike zone, though we'll go below that and certainly participate in transactions above that as well. Some of the sectors we've fundamentally focused on over our careers has been in media and telecom, which the panel had done a great job covering earlier today. But we've also been, over the last number of years, have been very focused on business services. So as we all sit here today and talk about different business platforms, business services is a key element to our success in our investment strategy, predominantly because there's an overabundance of opportunities out there in the market today and certainly need great investor support. So our partners here at Avondale have been together now for close to 5 years, and we've been investing actively in private equity for 15.
Anita?
Good morning. I'm Anita Graham, and I'm a general partner with Opportunity Capital Partners. Opportunity Capital is based in Fremont, California, and we were one of the funds that I think Janelle referred to in the first panel. We started out as an SSBIC, which is a specialized small business investment company regulated by the SBA back in the 1970s, and were the early investors in a lot of the minority radio and TV broadcasting entrepreneurs, including Radio One and Kathy Hughes and Amador Bustos and so Z Spanish and so forth and so on. So we have been investing in the communications sector as a part of our portfolio strategy since the fund's inception. And we have a significant amount of experience and relationship in that area. Opportunity Capital's current fund is $135 million of capital under management. Our average investment size is on the low end $2 million, on the high end $10 million. And we are what you would call a growth capital late stage fund. So we're not doing early stage or venture investing. We come in when there's a revenue track record and customer demand, and then invest in those businesses. Like all, I think, funds who really focused on media broadcasting, you know, we have also had to get ourselves educated and learn about how to take those same skills and invest in wireless, which is a little bit of a different animal, but we have been able to invest in wireless companies also out of our latest fund.
Thank you, Anita. I'd also like to add that Anita is a member of the FCC's Advisory Committee on Diversity and Digital Age, so thank you. She is a regular participant in these discussions, so we really appreciate you coming back.
Thank you.
James Downey.
Thank you, Director Reed. I'm a managing director at Hunter Weiss, which specializes in middle market companies, and I'm their in-house media expert. I've been in banking for most of my career, for over 20 years at banks like Barclays, where we did, as either agent or co-agent, more than $40 billion of financing. From there, I moved into the middle market financings in 2001 with Wells Fargo Foothill, built their portfolio from 100 to 500 million, and then in a joint venture with a New York hedge fund, went from 0 to 250 million. Again, I'm an expert on credit. Right now at Hunter Weiss, I do loan brokering and financial advisory with emphasis on media and middle market. My three current engagements are all in the Hispanic space and happen coincidentally also to be in television. So I'm very current on television, but interested in a broader arena as well.
Thank you, James. Our next panelist is Mark Grovick, who comes to us from, Mark is from New Market Ventures. Mark.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and good morning, everybody. New Markets Venture Partners is a $75 million under management venture capital investment company. I'm the general partner and co-founder. We started our first fund. We have 3 funds. Our first fund was a New Markets Fund, which was similar to the SSBIC program that came out under the Clinton administration. And our focus is typically software around media, communications, everything from healthcare IT to education, but web services is, I think, our sweet spot. We've done some hardware around tunable antennas and those sorts of things, but mostly we feel comfortable in the software space, prefer the SaaS delivery model, and typical investment size is about $1 to $3 million. Our average revenues of our companies we invest in are anywhere from $1 million to $10 million. So on the earlier stage of the spectrum here, but we don't do pre-revenue. And look forward to helping in any way I can today, meeting with you folks and answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Our next panelist is Brian Milan from Brian is from Whitestone Capital. Brian.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My firm, Whitestone Capital, is an 18-year-old financial advisory firm. I'm sort of the generalist up here. We started off advising the federal government on global capital markets and securitizations, which is a lot of my background. We have an investment banking practice that primarily focuses as an advisor to minority-owned firms and in several areas, but telecommunications and finance. We have relationships with 3 multi-billion-dollar funds where our primary responsibility is to help source deals, clients, vet them, and then walk them into and through the process with our 3 multi-billion-dollar funds. Thank you.
Right, I'm going to start out generally, and I want to ask sort of the panel overall. Let's talk about when you're looking at investment opportunities and you're looking at particular companies, what are the types of things that you'd like to see in their business plans? What things do you like to see in terms of the experience set of the individuals that are coming to you for investment? Just speaking generally. Anyone can start.
Sure. I mean, I'll start off. Well, the first credible thing I look for in any business plan is the hurdles that they have to get over. Not just forecasts and certainly the data that supports what the business's main mission is, but certainly where they're gonna have to get to, and certainly some of the funding that they'd be requiring will help them get them there. And so we always see the business plans that are great with the hockey stick curves and the how great the business and the people behind the business are, but we also want to see, quicker than later, the hurdles that they're going to have to achieve. And one of the quick aspects that we look at is whether we can help them get them there.
The key things that we look at, in addition to what Reginald just alluded to, is obviously the management team is important to us. Not just the individual experience set of the individual, but the group experience, whether you have a collective track record. Because again, certainly your skills indicate what each of you as an individual can do, but it's very important for us that the team is cohesive, because a lot of transactions fall apart because the team is not cohesive, because you don't have the requisite skills amongst the group. So it's important for us, and I think as you consider how you make up your team, have you worked together before? Have you had a successful track record, even if it's just on one transaction? That's an important thing to us. The other thing is, what is the use of proceeds? We like capital efficient deals, meaning that capital is going in, the company is able to generate cash flow, and there's a valuation of the business at the end. As you listen to us talk today, and particularly for the private equity representatives here on the panel, you're going to hear, and if not new to you, we get in and we get out. So we have to get out of our transactions, and we have to get out of our transactions with some kind of multiple. So being able to value the business going in, but more importantly, what is the exit strategy coming out of a transaction is equally as important to us, because that tells us how are we going to get repaid and when, and those are a couple of the considerations that we would look at.
Firstly, I would encourage everybody to focus on their presentation. Sending out a business plan is a little bit like sending out a resume. You have on average no more than 2 or 3 minutes of attention from a reader. So start with a really good summary. If you can't write a really good one-page summary that doesn't include any jargon that a novice reader wouldn't understand. really important points, like Anita reference, is having an exit. No investor is going to partner with you indefinitely. So your plan, even though you're focused on the startup, have it as a component of it, the way your investor will either monetize or be able to exit over time. Relevant experience to what you're proposing to do is also really, really important. You can't just, be beamed into a completely different industry and expect to raise capital on that. And then another point I would make is have a fully funded business plan. If you need X million dollars to get the project done from start to finish, have a way to get the whole funding together. Even if it's not all fully, completely baked at the outset, have a plan to do it. Nobody wants to see something that, funds the $2 million to launch something, but not the $8 million that you need to grow it subsequently.
I completely agree with everything that's been said. On our website, newmarketsvp.com, there's a section that says what we look for, and it's a really good, I think, a good list of questions for people putting together a pitch for an investor. It's pretty comprehensive. So let me just add one thing, and it's sort of a binary metric that you need to have, I think, before you're going to be able to engage in a meaningful conversation with any investor, and that is sort of some traction. So before you want to talk to anybody, you need to talk about what you have. So we're not asset-based lenders. You're not going to have brick and mortar for us to securitize, but for example, a really happy customer goes a long way when we're speaking with your firm and looking at diligence. A potential contract, a pipeline, a technology that works that's got third-party data, it's not just you. But pretty much a non-starter for us is if you don't have a product in a happy customer's hands that we can speak with, you're going to have a really hard time getting conversation going with anybody. So get your initial traction, try and fund as much as you can through customer cash flow, and then growth is much easier than to accelerate by these sorts of conversations.
I'll just add a couple quick things. I've seen a lot of business proposals where the people are extremely smart, the engineers, and the first 5 pages would be like a Nobel Peace Prize for some technology. So it really is important. And also you find that a lot of you guys are very smart, but you're not marketing people or finance people. So it's written where some of your best kept secrets are not even in the book sometimes. I had one deal where the person had the technology partner was going to provide equity for them initially and be a part of the deal. And I found it out like later on in a discussion. It wasn't even in the book. So, I think you have to take a step back and say, what are the critical things that are required for the reader and for the investor? Not that you're so much into gigabytes and technology and throughput, et cetera. Number 2, I would say be careful of technology where you make sure that you're not going to get leapfrogged in a year, that you come in, we looked at a deal in Kenya that was technology based, but it was cutting edge technology, but it wasn't going to be cutting edge in a couple years. And the last thing is glasses, please. Technology leapfrog and risk mitigation, as opposed to trying to, perhaps you don't have clients, but maybe you could partner. Part of what we do in our business and our business models is to try to find partners for people, large corporations or middle market companies that you could partner with to mitigate some of this upfront risk and or provide capital expertise, et cetera, to buffer your business plan. Thank you.
Now, Brian, you alluded to something that sort of dovetails into my next question. That is, we've talked a little bit about what you're looking for and what are the effective business plans that you're looking at. But I want sort of each of you to address some of the most common mistakes that you see when people are approaching you for capital. And as a two-parter to that question, maybe you can talk about a success story, a smaller venture that was very successful, what they did to convince you that they would be a good investment bet. But again, the first part of that is, let's talk about some of the most common errors that you can address that would be helpful to avoid. We'll start, Reginald.
Sure. One of the I mean, to kind of start out, one of the big things that I've seen from a success story standpoint, and frankly, some of the best deals I've seen are the ones we haven't funded. And that's kind of reassuring that there are things that not everyone sees. And so, getting back to what Brian said earlier about risk mitigation and whatnot, the biggest thing that we found that is a hurdle is the expectations before a founder or management team member comes in to present to us. They many times will have conversations prior with other fellow entrepreneurs and CEOs, and they might have a preconceived notion or expectation, and it's quickly recognized. And not every company is the same. Not every industry dictates the same investment valuation. And so that's one of the things that's not inside a business plan that we focus on as well. And we get to the matter pretty quickly to understand how flexible and, more importantly, how understanding a company founder is in wanting to grow his business, and when it comes down to negotiations of getting down to a fundamental value that we can all agree on. And so that's a pretty big paramount middle ground that we have to get to. And then certainly from a success story standpoint, there was a media company that we turned down, and we didn't believe that they could populate as many data points as they told us they were going to. And as Brian said earlier, they partnered with a number of international groups and proved us wrong, and are very successful, and Standard & Poor's owns them today.
I think some of the common mistakes that I see, for example, are in the business plans. First of all, I think to the comments that were made earlier, if you assume that we're going to read the executive summary, and that executive summary is about 4 or 5 pages, you have to tell the whole story in those 4 or 5 pages. And it has to be concise, to the point, not only talking about why you're raising this money, but understanding what are the returns for the investors. And that's really where you've got to put it all together. I've seen so many business plans where literally I had to get to the end of the business plan before I even knew how much money they were raising. And they went and talked about everything up through then and to that point. So I think you have to understand your reader when you are putting these business plans together. That's a common mistake. Another mistake is if you get to the point where you're making a presentation, you're the CEO, you may have had some help in developing the business plan, developing the presentation. There's nothing wrong with that. You have a CFO who's working with you or you've contracted with. But as the CEO, I expect you to know the numbers. I expect to be able to ask you what are the financial assumptions behind that. All too often you see that handed off to the person who developed the model, which sort of is an indication to me that you really don't know what's behind the numbers. That's an important, that's a very common mistake that people make. And then understanding that a business plan is your plan. And it's not static, it's dynamic. So if the market is changing around you, you have to be able to address the macro and micro concerns that are going on, to kind of write a business plan as though competition doesn't exist, and that if you've got something that's really that good and you're not expecting that you're going to have competitive pressures coming behind you, so again sort of steps back and says you haven't really thought this out. So it's your plan, and really owning that plan, I think, is key to convincing me or any capital provider that you can not only execute the plan, but weather the storm. Because the truth be told, in all my years of investing, very few business plans have hit their numbers. They've either been higher in some cases, but more often than not lower. Not so low that it killed the deal, but again, you have to make adjustments along the way. And as far as the success story is concerned, and OCP certainly has had many success stories, but a recent deal that I helped put together is really about collaboration, as you heard in the initial panel, where a group of entrepreneurs actually ran this particular operation under a big company. And they had the opportunity to buy that entity and run it now as an entrepreneurial team. And what they were able to do is take that skill set, and it was a great story because they knew the property. It translated, they understood the weaknesses and the strengths of it, but they then went and put together financing that was a combination of SBA and state funding and their own equity and some outside equity, and made that deal work. And quite frankly, in this day and age, that's how you have to be. You have to be that creative. You have to look at some of these new pockets of monies. They're not in every state, but thank goodness they're in the state of Maryland. And really take advantage of that as you try to assemble your cash. So that's the success story that I really wanted to kind of highlight for everybody, because I think it's representative of what you have to do in today's market.
Just one note of caution: every entrepreneur has to be very enthusiastic about their business and be willing to engage a listener or potential investor. But there's a line that you don't want to cross, and that's what I call founder's disease, where you're so carried away and you can talk 45 minutes without stopping about your business plan, what you're going to do, why your product or business model is the best one that's ever been invented. And just be a good listener and pretend you're fishing. I mean, you get somebody a nibble on the hook, but you've got to bring it in slowly. You can't just jerk them into the boat. And the second comment I'd make is, I already alluded to, is have your business plan fully funded. Most new businesses fail due to undercapitalization, and just have a plan around that. Again, you don't have to have it all buttoned up at the very beginning, but have a path to success rather than illiquidity and failure. One example I'd like to give is ZGS Broadcasting, who are now the largest owners of Telemundo affiliates privately held in this country. Started out, on a shoestring by buying low-power television licenses, getting the Telemundo affiliate in markets where Telemundo wasn't operating already. But one of the really clever things he would do along the way that didn't involve any capital, as a low-power license, he didn't have must carry on the cable, but he needed to get on a cable in order to sell the advertising. So he would have promotional events, and he would have a table and sign up people that came to the promotional events, sort of, well, don't you want Time Warner cable? So he would take, people, you'd get names and addresses and phone numbers. He'd take 200 slips of paper and then Time Warner said, I want you to carry on my channel, and here's why. And each of those slips of paper was worth, $4,000 to $5,000 to Time Warner. So they said, sure, we'll give you a channel. And it didn't cost him any money.
So James said most reason businesses fail is because they run out of money, and I usually put two things together. It's either businesses run out of money or people are crazy. So those are my two things. I agree with you. But my advice is around very specifically the point of view that Anita was trying to convey about understanding the audience who you're speaking to, and unfortunately or fortunately, we have to be very exit-oriented and return-oriented. So the mistakes that I see, you can say, start with not having a good description of an exit plan, not understanding different pricing around potential exits at different levels. So if you really understand the potential buyer and the potential prices that they'll pay based on real-world, we call them comps or comparables, then you're framing your whole valuation and return discussion in a very sane way. A lot of times entrepreneurs don't get advice from good attorneys who do a lot of deals in the market. They don't understand what's market for valuation expectations. They don't understand at reasonable exits what the return for investors might look like, and then they're out of whack with the risk-return emotional reaction that we're going to have when people come in. If you have historical numbers, present them next to your projections. Tell a story of how you're going to go from here to here and then to the exit, and create a return scenario for an investor that's reasonable given your risk level. And entrepreneurs don't do a very good job of that. They're not thinking about how we think and how we'd like to see the deal. And if you have a very nice story about here's my historicals, here's what drives my revenues, here's how I'm going to grow, here's who bought companies just like where I'm going, and here's what they paid, and here's why that's a really nice return for you, you're going to be in the top 10% of entrepreneurs in terms of explaining your business to us. And it's so that's the biggest mistake that I see. People just are out of whack with the way we're looking at the world. Not every business is private equity or venture capital fit. And you should know if you're not a fit why you're an exception, or if you're not a fit, just accept that you're not a fit. As a success story goes, I would say we had a company that was a technology provider to lots of people with inventory on the net, and they provided an opportunity for those people to serve video ads in a really dynamic and creative way. And the CEO had an idea of providing this technology on the long tail of content providers around video, and starting an ad network around folks that there was one video that had how to develop film, and they had no advertising, and they had millions of hits, and CEO was saying, why don't we go to Kodak and we can deliver this whole, just send the guy a check, we'll do a rev share. Well, it turns out that our huge customers that we're providing technology to, AOL, Scripps, A&E, those people also wanted, they had extra inventory that they wanted ads sold against. So as soon as we hired somebody in New York who knew the ad sales business, we were able to offer our customers a solution as opposed to a technology. And our revenues doubled in 1 year around going into the ad sales business as well as a technology provider. So when you're looking at a value proposition, your customers, I would just encourage you to think, once we started thinking about solutions instead of technology, we were then acquired by one of our bigger customers pretty quickly for a very nice multiple.
At the risk of repeating, which I won't do, I think there are a couple things that are a little bit different, so I won't repeat myself. One is when I find that in my little niche that people that come to me, they're really anxious to get in front of the investor. And these are obviously the end investors, and I'm sort of the go-between. And I find that I have to slow people down. And then when they get in the room, they're not prepped. So they think they're prepped. So it's hard to make somebody who's a founder, visionary, to understand that you're going to be in front of this person for 10 or 15 minutes. And some of these guys I deal with, they're type A on steroids, ADD on steroids. I mean, they can't sit still for 3 minutes. So, you can't be in there taking them around the long way around. So I find that that's a big problem in these meetings is you don't get the flow of the investor, of the room, and you come across either methodical or just not confident. The other thing is, trying to find things that are different here. I find that a lot of the presentations, that graphics can go a long way once you get to that meeting. So, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So rather than coming in trying to read through the business plan or PowerPoint, if you were to be able to use the power of graphics or charts, I think that's very powerful. So I see that as a common mistake. And then sort of tied to the first one, a lot of times people are not good listeners. They want to get their story across so much. They're so passionate that my background is I was a salesman at First Boston and Solomon Brothers back in the 70s for a long time. And sometimes the customer said, yes, he's buying the bonds, but you're not listening. You're still running your mouth, and you missed a trade. So those are my three things. As far as a success story, my main guy I deal with is an expert in pipes. So what they like to do is, if they can find a slick idea that we can then, they make the investment, which we've done, into a publicly traded company. They get stock at a discount, and that money is earmarked for that transaction. So the investor, the entrepreneur, gets a partner, he gets capital, and he gets the firm behind him as well. He or her, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Mark, you touched on this. You mentioned that not everyone is a private equity or VC fit, and I want to jump on that a little bit. For new businesses looking for initial capital infusion, many of you mentioned your investment thresholds at about $1 million and up and beyond. A lot of new businesses and startups are looking for seed money that's at much lower levels than that. So what advice can you give to them, Ray, alternative sources of funding? And And when they get that funding, when should they start looking again at organizations like yours for larger scale CAP support? And again, that's open to everybody on the panel.
I think to start off, we mentioned it on the panel earlier, and I'll reiterate it, that certainly everyone certainly looks to friends and family as a way of fundraising. It's referenced out there in many different resources, but secondly, and in fact, we've referred a good number of entrepreneurs to what we call factors, and in the polite term or correct terminology, it's accounts receivable financing. And so in that element, and Jim probably has a good bit of experience in it from the lending side, basically you're getting your receivables financed up front, and then waiting for your customers to pay you. They'll be able to collect on a receivable in the future. So we've lent, it's what we call, it's an ABL facility, quasi-ABL, and we've referred to a lot of different entrepreneurs to that structure. And then there's some other avenues, such as the SBA route that we've talked about earlier in the previous panel, and some other avenues.
Yeah, I would also say, again, kind of look at your local and state funding opportunities. I'll be specific. In the state of Maryland, there is something that's called the Maryland Small Business Development Financing Authority, and I'm on the board of that, and that's an entity that provides financing for small business across an array of structures, whether it's for asset-based lending for contracting deals, or bonding, or equity for startup companies. They kind of cover the gamut. Obviously, they're looking to benefit the state of Maryland. They're looking to increase jobs in the state of Maryland, and you have to be there. But that's an example. Another example, if you're on the early stage venture side, in the state of Maryland, is something called TEDCO, and they really look at early stage wireless, internet type companies. So really go and, as a starting point, start looking at what's available that is non-traditional. Now, nothing replaces your own capital. So at some point you have to have that discussion with yourselves, your family, your friends, because you have to have some skin in the game. So you have to come up with capital, however you raise it, however you do it. Sweat equity is great, but that doesn't replace real cash, and people like to see you have real cash in the transaction. And then to Thomas's other point about when is private equity right for you, and is it ever right for you, it goes back to some of the things that we're talking about. If you have a business that you want to grow, that you're comfortable with, and you really, when people start talking to you about selling the business, you just want to have a nice lifestyle, you maybe want to pass something on to your kids, we kind of categorized as a lifestyle business. That's not private equity, because you can't address the kind of returns which are, depending on where you are on the risk profile, could be anywhere from 2 times to 3 times. In the heydays it was 4 and 5 times cash put in. You can't generate that way, a return to that investor. So private equity would not be right for you. Again, look at the growth strategy of the business, because we're looking for that kind of growth curve. We talked about valuation going in, valuation going out. That's going to be important. So private equity is not always the right partner for you. That doesn't mean you can't find patient capital. SBICs, which is something that the first panel referred to, if the SBIC strategy happens to be one of what I call a mezzanine strategy, that could be usable. Obviously, in that case, you have to be generating revenues because you have to have cash flow. But mezzanine funding is a much more patient strip of capital that allows a company to grow. And so that's what you have to really think about, matching what your needs are to the right kind of capital provider.
3 quick thoughts. One is vendor financing. I'll give an example. There's a company I know that came up with the business plan of putting monitors in every 7-Eleven store around the country. It was something like 7,000 locations. The equipment manufacturer liked the business plan so much that they gave them an 8-figure commitment to not only supply the equipment but install it, and also do a revenue sharing on the other end, so it didn't count as debt. A second thought is people who've been in the business and successfully exited. One example is Randy Michaels, who was very successful in the radio business, sold his company to Clear Channel. He was at the Tribune for a while, and then he got bored there. He ended up buying radio stations again after having been out of the business for 8-10 years. So if somebody's done it similar and exited, they might have a pocket of capital they'd be willing to co-invest with you. And a third idea would particularly useful for any business plan that is going to create jobs. The government has this EB-5 program, and it's for a $500,000 investment. A non-citizen will get a green card coming to the country. That's very patient, long-term capital. I mean, your business plan has to make sense, and they do want the money back eventually. And there's a 6 to 8 month timeline on getting it. But this is very good money, and it can be the $1 coming into your business. EB-5.
So far, nobody's mentioned my favorite way to fund a business, which is from revenue. So bootstrap, and you know, in the software business, there might be a little more opportunity to sell, pre-sell, quote-unquote vaporware. But the other strategy that's not inconsistent with that, and need to mention TEDCO. I'm on the investment committee of TEDCO for the state of Maryland, with some folks with Stan and those people, and Anthony. And what I see is a community getting behind some businesses sometimes. So in Maryland, there's university programs and incubation, and there's angel networks around these incubators, and there's angel presentations that you get into, and then TEDCO gets behind you, and the state of Maryland's got something called DBED's got another investment program, and then there's early stage investors. And if you have an idea that people get excited about, you know, maybe it's your vendor, maybe it's your customer, maybe it's the state, maybe it's a university incubator, maybe it's an angel, you know, and you're working all the angles, and you start to build a critical mass, and you'll find that something either gets wings or it doesn't, you know. And sometimes we'll get involved and just be helpful for a year or two, and half the time that ends up being a really great investable business that I've known for 2 years, but we didn't invest till it got to a sizable, or it sort of disappears because it doesn't work. So we date for a long time before we get married, and we just helpful. One of my favorite ways to do diligence is to introduce you to a potential customer. If that takes off, then you have a customer. I have a good reference. They're not BSing me like your other references are because they're a friend of mine, but building a company it takes a village. So you get the community, whoever is going to be relevant behind you, and you slowly work it. That's what I've seen is successful. Everybody gets involved in an incubation, and eventually you're right for venture or you're not.
I would just add, I've just been appointed to the SBA has a Regulatory Fairness Enforcement Board under the Ombudsman, so I've been the last 2 days doing these conferences with them. So I would just say, like the earlier panel had an SBA person on it. We've been pushing that a lot the last 2 days of my travel. So I would just say try to talk to your SBA representatives as well.
Anita, you touched on the concept of private equity partnership, and I want to ask you all about that a little bit. In the sense that when a business does receive financing from each of your firms, to what extent do you get involved in the ownership and or management of that particular venture? Or does it vary?
No, it's consistent. We're involved in from a governance standpoint, we have seats on the board. From an ownership standpoint, that's usually dictated again by valuation, which I call art and science, you know, and we never start out on the same page. Entrepreneur has a valuation of X, we have a valuation of Y, and then we have to kind of come together on what that looks like. But ultimately, the goal of the private equity investing, if you keep that in mind, is they're trying to get at, okay, if I invest this much today at this valuation and there's an exit strategy, whatever that may be, at some point in the future, 3, 4, 5 years in the future, and I want to make 2 times my money, how much do I have to own of that business to get there? And that's just math to us. Now, in a lot of instances when we disagree on valuation, it may in part be because, like in today's market, there's a little bit of a imbalance because folks have been so nervous and so burned that to us, 2 to 3 times cash flow we think might be safe under any circumstances, and it has nothing to do with what the company is doing or comps, how companies are being sold. You just have people who just want to buy at the bottom. And if they buy at the bottom, then chances are they're going to have some upside. So if you're the entrepreneur trying to say, okay, that's one valuation, but if you look at the marketplace, if you look at comps, valuation should be here, how do you get to that middle ground? And there's a lot of ways, earn backs, management starts to perform. You have a way of kind of grabbing back some of that equity, because that really is always a bit of a contention when you're kind of talking to private equity folk. So those are some of the things that we would kind of look at.
Any other thoughts on that? Well, let me jump in. I got a few questions from our audience. This one says, do you have experience with the use of new market tax credits in deals, and if so, what do you think of them? Do they have a role? And anybody can take that up.
We actually applied for and did not receive the new markets tax credits, and subsequently, I know there's legislation to make this more applicable to non-real estate types of financing, but as it stands, the folks that I've seen that got the tax credits are having a hard time utilizing them for small business. There's a 7-year lockup period, and it's got to be reinvested if you exit before then. So you're forced to put that money back to work, and it doesn't really fit with the way that we run our businesses. So I've seen some innovative structures with LITEX and new market tax credits around real estate deals, and I think it works really well for them. I don't think it has a place currently in private equity, although CDBCA has some nice amendments before Congress that would make it fit much better in the future, and who knows, I stay as far away from the politics as I can.
Anyone else? This next question is from Franklin Cumberpatch. What is your most important metric for evaluating a technology company? Is it EBITDA or ARPU, number of customers, revenue, et cetera? What's your most important criteria? And that's open to all the panelists. We'll start, Reginald.
Sure. I think ultimately it would change significantly based on the business. You're mentioning metrics on a consumer level,
So if it's a B2C platform and you're targeting consumers, then it'd have some great relevance. But if it's a B2B platform, the customers would become much more of the concern and concentration risk within a customer base. But I think ultimately, and you mentioned EBITDA as well, I think entrepreneurs, that's their first question when coming to many of us investors is, are we meeting your criteria for our earnings base? And frankly, we have to set the bar somewhere from a marketing perspective as investors, but we very well will go below. We will, sometimes we will, dismiss companies that have larger earnings bases. We just don't like the business, or there's too much concentration risk within one industry. Our portfolio has to be balanced, and so if we have 90% of our portfolios in wireless communications, we're probably not going to do that last deal in wireless communications. So there's many different variables, but they're all certain points that we all pay particular attention to.
Yeah, I would say that, cash flow, obviously, from my perspective as more of a late-stage player, is always going to be key and paramount to me. But if you're an early-stage player, in today's market, and that's what we're talking about, is capital efficiency, and I referred to it earlier. That means that you've got to show that with X amount of capital, you can be cash flow positive fairly quickly. Early stage investors used to have a much longer range of patience before seeing that cash flow positive come around. Now, we've all seen a lot of social media deals that are still not profitable, that have gone public, and I put them in one category. But if you really are talking about the majority of the business, especially middle market companies where the rules of engagement are completely different, then you really have to think about cash in, a fully funded plan, as Jim and the other panelists have been talking about. But that cash has got to generate cash flow positive at a much shorter period of time. Investors simply are not as patient as they used to be. So that early stage investor that used to be willing to wait 18, 24 months is looking to see this company turn within 12 months.
Just from a lending perspective, most banks look at comparable sales. That's the single biggest metric, and find businesses that have been sold that are similar, and look at the metric that was based on. It could have been based on ARPU, it could have been EBITDA, it could have been number of subscribers like TV One, but just find comparable sales and measure your business against the same metrics.
Our high growth early stage, we're early, although it's not seed, tends to be valued on a multiple of revenues. But I like sitting next to Anita because it's a nice complementary discussion now. So the multiple that you'll get on your revenue, which is how we look at things, has a lot to do with capital efficiency, profitability, growth rates, right? So we will value it on a revenue multiple dependent on, you'll get a much higher multiple if you're cash flow positive and you're growing quickly than if you're bleeding money. And first of all, your numbers you've been using on returns of 2 or 3, I still think of that as a risk-free rate myself, even though treasuries are way down. And then on the capital efficiency side, I mean, some of our companies that we did in the early 2000s, we've held them for 6, 7 years, and they're still bleeding money. So we're done with that game, and we've all learned the hard way as we hit 2008, 2009, and the IPO markets and the M&A markets shut down. No one's got the stomach anymore for 5 years. There's a really good book called The Lean Startup, and it discusses this topic well, but you have to get to cash flow positive as soon as possible. No one wants to fund eternal cash bleeding anymore, but we tend to value, with that said, our 2 valuation metrics are revenue multiple and how much cash you need. And we put those 2 things together. So the capital efficiency is really tied into the valuation, even though it is a multiple of revenues.
Excuse me. I would just add that we look at sort of the triangulation, I guess. We look at all 3 of these, but at the end of the day, we sort of say, back when I was doing transactions on Wall Street, trades actually, we do trades for basis points pickup or cash. One of my clients one day asked me, how do I get paid, basis points or in cash? And I said, I think I got the answer. So we tend to look at sort of the convergence, but at the end of the day, we like to see a multiple of cash flow, and we try to be in the, depends on the exact technology, but in the 4 to 5 times cash flow range is where we try to be.
This question is, again, from the audience, kind of related to what you all have been talking about. It's really sort of advice to new entrants or new businesses. And the question really is, do you have to be in business for a minimum number of years before considering approaching an investor? Or to what extent is that balanced against what's in your balance sheet? So the real question is, do you consider time in business more so? How do you weight that amongst other factors? Let's start on the other side and come back. So we'll start with Brian.
Okay. I don't really, well, time in business is important if that's the question, but at the end of the day, it's the plan, the nuance of the plan, the cash flows, the clients, all the things we talked about before. So at the end of the day, the investments could be made predicated on what your vision is for the business model, the risk-adjusted returns that you're looking at there. The time in the business can cut both ways, if I understand the question correctly. If you're in business 5 years and you haven't turned a profit and you're still struggling, I think you shouldn't be making the phone call. You should probably maybe changing businesses. I don't know. But at the same time, that time in business can be a positive if you can prove that you've gotten clients, you've gotten expertise, you've put quote-unquote sweat equity, real equity in, where you've reduced the risk in the transaction, as opposed to having a business plan as purely a vision, and you come and you say, hey, the last 18 months, I've got this contract, I've gone to conferences, I signed up X, Y, and Z, I have some cash flow coming in. I mean, I think all those things go into making the business plan, but it seems like that was a bifurcated question. I mean, it can't be Boolean. It's got to be together. It's got to be a business plan that's predicated on expertise, first of all, then secondly, some real experience that evolves into a business plan that can be credible, that can be presented to early stage, mid stage, et cetera.
Yep, I agree with Brian. It cuts both ways.
Any other thoughts on that?
I mean, going back to the example of the company that was putting monitors in all the 7-Eleven stores, I mean, the founder came into the meeting in, you know, blue jeans and a baseball cap and had never done this before and raised, you know, 30-some million. But that's more the exception than the rule. I think most workable business plans are sort of minor evolutions of something that is already established.
Baseball
cap? So, you know, an evolutionary business as opposed to something revolutionary. And for those business plans, you do have to have relevant experience and established, you know, either customer base or product knowledge that you can transfer to your new business.
I would say, you know, if you're starting out a business and you're patching together cash and you're trying to get into the marketplace, you should think about, okay, track record. How am I going to define a successful track record? I always tell entrepreneurs who are out there starting, put a W on the board. Now, how do you define a win? However you define the win, that's what you need to do, because that's part of the story that you're going to tell. Because if you haven't raised capital yet and you're going to come to a capital provider, you have to tell a story of success in some shape, manner, or form. So you have to be thinking about, what track record am I trying to define? How am I trying to define success? And is the definition of success, when I talk about it, going to relate to the business that I'm in? And so that's how you think about getting into the business, and that's how you think about. So I would not look at it as just time in business, because, you know, we've backed individuals who've had years of experience, who've come out of C-suites of corporations, and it doesn't always translate positively into entrepreneurship. So that's not a direct correlation at all. I think you have to, we kind of look at these on an individual basis. Everybody said we look at all of the attributes and the character and the things that we've been talking about throughout the panel. But I would make the recommendation, define your success and try to be convincing about it and get a W, get a win.
I'll echo that with putting W's on the board, because fundamentally, like Anita said, if you have 50 years experience in the telecom space, it doesn't mean that you were always meant to run a business. Just because you've worked for someone else for 50 years doesn't necessarily mean you're now ready to be an entrepreneur. Putting a W on the board, what are some of those W's? Being able to have the guts to go out there and start the business. I think that's one of the first W's, and then the second one is being able to interact with the public, the consumer, as well as your customers. A lot of people have been institutionalized, being in the industry for that many years. They don't know how to communicate to the public. And so some of those W's Anita said I completely agree with. And I don't think you have to garner a heavy balance sheet over a certain number of years. There's no true metric to that.
I just want to add very quickly. Keep trying. Okay. To use that example in finance that we see all the time, especially lately, there are a lot of guys and girls coming out of Wall Street, and they've run big portfolios, hedge funds and private equity internally within the company, especially on the hedge fund side. But you could make $20 million in your pocket, but your rent's paid, the phone bill's paid, the credit card is paid, everything is paid. You just got to show up and theoretically use your brain to make money. But when you take that step and come outside, it's a whole, all of a sudden these guys like, I have to call a computer guy, my computer's up, I have to pay bills, I have to get the sodas, I have to get, somebody's got to do it. It's just an entirely different process. And that's part of the point, that internal success in a major corporate entity doesn't necessarily translate to success in an entrepreneurial environment.
This question is for the panel. It says, we represent companies in the manufacturing sector that need 75 to 125 million and have 75% of the needed funds in authorized municipal IDRBs. Are you more likely to provide credit enhancements to get those bonds underwritten if you're interested? It says all our startups. Does that question make sense? Do you want to handle that one? I'll read it again. We represent companies in the manufacturing sector that need 75 to 125 million and have 75% of the needed funds in authorized municipal IDRBs. Are you more likely to provide credit enhancements to get those bonds underwritten if you're interested in that type of investment? I take it. And they might need some clarification on that question.
Yeah, that's not something that you're talking about industrial revenue bonds.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Underwriting those. That's not something that we do as a fund.
Okay, because we can't issue credit enhancements as portfolio.
Right.
I mean,
All right.
A bank would have to do that.
Okay.
And they'll do it based, the bank would do that based on the business plan. But they'll obviously look to where the 25% equity is coming from as well. That'd be a key factor.
I could talk to them afterwards. If they want to talk to me afterwards, I could talk to them.
And whose question was that?
They left.
Last one, how much capital are your funds willing to burn in each milestone before an IPO in a high-growth startup that has patents? How much capital are your funds willing to burn in each milestone before an IPO in a high-growth startup that has patents? This is Bill Branham's question. You may want to clarify.
Yeah, if we got a company that's government is going to give, say the government is going to fund solar capital, and we start an incubator with college or university, and we just don't know how much money is for each milestone. Would you be willing to fund along the way to get to, say, 70 million?
That need more information.
Okay. I guess that's a discussion.
So A rounds, right, can be, you have your seed money that comes in, angels, friends, family, vendor base, customer based, right? You get to a point where you can raise an A round. That's much later stage than it was 10 years ago, right? And it sort of dips. In the 90s and earlier, venture was not seed stage startup, and then it got a little in the late 90s. So right now, you still have to be well post-revenue unless you've done it before and made money for VCs. So your A round's a 3 to 5 on $1 million sort of run rate. You can put together $3 to $5 million if you have something exciting, right? Let's assume not just patents, right? Something interesting solves a problem for a big market. May or may not be patented. Most software is not patented. But put together your $3 to $5 million round, you have to have a pretty strong story at that point that you can at least get to cash flow positive. Most times, the story doesn't hold together and you need some more money. So a few $1 million around that A round to get you to cash flow positive because you missed your numbers, that's fine. You do it inside. You don't have to go out. And then your next raise, if things are working, is a really strong growth raise to really go from $10 to $100 million, and maybe you could raise, then you're into these big, Charles River, NEA, Kleiner, right? These guys, they want to write $10 million checks, maybe a couple of them come together. So you get a $20 million round, and you can really go from 10 to 100 and sell for 200 to 500. That's a 3 to 5, 7, $10 million sort of A, and then, BC sort of another 10 or 20. That's a max for a deal that's working. But that's really just rooting around in the ether on that one.
That's if we're doing, say we're doing a regional project for the whole southeastern United States. Bringing solar capital to the south.
Yeah. There's a more complicated project finance answer that maybe somebody else should give, and you're talking about debt and equity and different layers, mezz and senior, and That's a whole different. We don't play that game.
We've got, we're closing the hour out. But I do want to address one subject that was raised a little bit in our earlier panel, and that's for those of you who've had some experience in the sort of traditional legacy broadcast space. I'll start out by saying I think even last year we had CENTCOM on this panel, and had posed the question to them. CENTCOM had obviously invested a great deal in early stage broadcasting years ago, but investment activity around broadcast properties has waned over the years, and part of that obviously being the evolution of new technologies and the changing revenue model. But it also seems that the revenue model with respect to the internet is still evolving, and I know that's a real tough thing that's a tough target to hit. So my question really is, what do broadcast owners now have to do to attract investment interest, given that we keep hearing that it is a stable business plan, but they are in serious trouble when it comes to capitalizing their businesses now, and primarily because a lot of attention is on the new technologies, the new social media, those types of things. So if those of you that are looking at that space can speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
I think the first element of broadcasting right now that's very attractive is the fundamental focus has gotten much more extreme than back in the early 80s, late 80s, where you had a generalist broadcasting approach of topics, subject matter, et cetera. For instance, ESPN. I think we all see in the news that they're getting very, very intense negotiations now with all the different NFL, NBA, et cetera, because ESPN dictates such a high multiple in negotiating, because they have so many subscribers that are always interested in 24/7 sports. That's one example, and then others like CNBC, a very focused broadcast network around the state of the markets. So there's still other markets out there. Jim mentioned a number of properties in the Hispanic space. There's still a lot of attraction to a lot of different focused niche markets, and I don't think the general media broadcasting platforms are thriving as they once did.
Yeah, I would add, because Opportunity Capital Partners, like CENTCOM, was one of those early investors, and we've enjoyed a lot of success in that space, and we think the fundamentals are still there. I think as we struggle to look at whether we put any additional capital into broadcast properties, part of our consideration is valuation, because there was a time we were paying 11, 12, 15 times broadcast cash flow, and you had comfort because it was the value of the license that was always your downside protection. So it really was a comfortable model. The model has been turned upside down. Valuations have been turned upside down, and many of us have spent the last few years, for those of us who had broadcast properties in our portfolio, restructuring. And so what I would say is fundamentally the business is still sound. There's cash flow. If you kind of look at some of the data, you would see, you're hearing that advertising revenue is coming back. So, radio and TV by no stretch of the imagination is dead. When you talk about digital strategy, and you have to have a digital strategy discussion, you're not making money there yet. But you got to have it. You can't have a conversation with your advertisers without having a digital strategy. But if you looked at that component of your business model, it's not positive yet. It's not profitable yet. So I think for us, what, quite frankly, we're doing opportunistically is saying, we think we've kind of got to the bottom of this market, at least we hope we have. And so the multiples now are 3 times, 4 times, some lower than that. And you're seeing those deals get done. Niche plays, urban, Hispanic, that combination. That's still very important. Being more niche focused, I think, is a way to get at the business. A lot of folks are going after aggregating small markets because the bigger markets are really struggling right now from a valuation standpoint. So for us, it's looking at what's that combination that gives us a leg up in broadcasting. But we still like it, and we have investments currently in that area. But like I said, valuation has been the key for us, and so we would be one of those buying low and expecting that this market is going to kind of creep back up.
if you want financing in the broadcast space, it's all about cash flow right now. If you don't have it, you're not going to get it. But having said that, there are a couple areas of opportunity that I'd like to present. There are independent owners of television stations and radio stations that sell time in the block time model. And what that means is that, you know, you buy from 6 to 8 p.m. and you provide the programming, and then you go out and sell the advertising. That is widely available. Every major market has 2 or 3 independents, and they're looking for people to buy the time. That's an opportunity to get in if you've got content that you can get the rights to distribute, and have a sales team or you know, advertisers that would like to get into it, particularly in the ethnic markets, because for better or worse, you know, the mature media business is dominated by people who look like me, and you know, 50% of this country is going to be other within the decade. So a focus on a minority programming and in the paid programming model, I think that's a real opportunity. And one caveat as we head into the broadband auction for television space, there are people out there that are buying licenses, planning to sell them into the auction. When that game of musical chairs stops, I think my personal bet is that there are going to be 5 chairs available and only 3 sell at the auction. So the people who don't get their license sold are going to be looking for people to fill that inventory. And back to the paid programming model, if you've got content and can sell it, you know, you could end up with one of those chairs.
So while I agree that content distribution will always be valuable assets, you always get paid for it, I'm going to be a little contrarian to say business as usual is game over. And when you say TV and internet, I mean, TV and radio are not going away. The distinction between internet and TV and radio, I think, will be increasingly blurred. And you know, Google bought Motorola, and they talk about patents, but there's all these set-top boxes there, right? And IPTV is coming on a storm. And my students that I teach a huge percentage are watching content from their computer on their television, and the different factions are not going to be able to fight off that integration for very much longer. You're going to have seamless integration between the web and the TV, and seamless integration between digital, and there's all these disruptive models from Netflix to Pandora, right? And business as usual is finished. And there's a lot of opportunity around there in evolutionary business models and technologies, particularly around tailored content, really targeted with associated advertising that becomes valuable and grouped on and Living Social. All these people are going to play in that space, as well as Google. So I think it's a really interesting time to make a lot of money in that space, but you're going to have to think outside the box. And if you have really good content and you have really good distribution, you have an asset that you need to evolve in order to monetize. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind.
Well, listen, we are approaching lunch hour. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all again for giving of your time and your expertise. We've only really scratched the surface. So obviously we'll want to have you back again as these questions develop. So Brian and Mark and James and Anita and Reginald, thank you very much. And thank you, you all be here this afternoon. I know that you've got a slate of one-on-one sessions. Mark, I think you got to take off a little bit early. But a couple housekeeping details. If you haven't gotten your schedule yet from Karen Beverly, please do see her. And I think if anyone has appointments with Mark, make sure that you check your schedule, because I think yours are starting right away. For those of you who are not going to be doing the afternoon sessions, please take a minute to fill out our survey. Calvin Osborne and Dan Margolis are here behind there, the gentlemen. You can hand off your surveys to them. Take a few minutes to do that. I do want to get everybody to lunch. We have Capital Cafe, which is, I think we'll have somebody directing folks to Cap Cafe, which is right inside the building, mostly. But thank you again. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your attention. And we'll take a break until the afternoon sessions. Thank you to our panelists.